Hey guys, tonight we're stepping into a place that smells faintly of oil paint, candle wax, and ambition. The year could be 1523 or 1623, it doesn't really matter. The air is thick with the quiet of old money and wet pigments. You're standing inside a portrait studio, dimly lit, the kind where a person could lose track of time and sanity trying to look perfectly still. There's a noblewoman sitting across from you, her gown stiff with embroidery, her hair sculpted into obedience, her neck weighed down by pearls. Her face? Calm, pale, composed, and completely, utterly expressionless. You might blink, wondering if she's just bored or terrified, but the truth is, stranger, you've just stumbled into an age when smiling in a royal portrait could ruin your reputation, your marriage, or even your political alliances. And if you ever tried holding a grin for 6 hours straight while balancing 20 pounds of brocade under a halo of candlelight, well, you probably wouldn't survive this photo shoot either. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is over there. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You blink again, adjusting to the flicker of a dozen tall candles. The painter is pacing behind his easel, squinting at the woman as if he's searching for something beyond the visible world. "Hold still," he murmurs, voice soft but sharp enough to cut. "Do not move the lips." You realize this is the standard rule of portraiture long before photography existed, long before the idea of saying cheese. A portrait wasn't about personality, it was about power, preserving your image the way saints were frozen in stained glass. And saints, as everyone knew, didn't giggle. The model's face is powdered into ghostliness, her expression blank but purposeful. She's not allowed to smile because a smile suggests movement, impermanence, or worse, emotion. The painter dabs a touch of carmine to her cheeks, but not too much. "Liveliness," he mutters under his breath, "is dangerous." He's not exaggerating. In this age, a portrait is a declaration of identity, politics, and divine order, all rolled into one. The Queen, or Duchess, or whoever's sitting here, isn't being painted as a woman. She's being painted as an idea, loyalty, virtue, and controlled grace. It's funny, really. You might think of portraits as the selfies of the past, but they were more like political statements, carved in oil and time. Every gesture, every fold of fabric, every tilt of the chin carried meaning. A smile could read as mockery. A raised eyebrow could spark a diplomatic scandal. You shift your gaze to the corner of the studio. There's a footman standing guard, arms crossed. Even here, in the painter's den, royalty is never alone. The sitter can't even scratch her nose without approval from protocol. The painter can't breathe too loudly in case it's interpreted as insolence. For royal women, portrait sessions weren't about self-expression, they were about survival. To look correct meant looking timeless, serene, and a little bit untouchable. The challenge, of course, was that sitting for hours on end under hot wax candles was closer to torture than glamour. Imagine it. Your corset tightening every time you inhale, the lace at your wrists itching like fire, the muscles of your jaw trembling because you're holding the same expression for 3 hours. Your eyes sting from the light, but you can't blink too often. It makes the painter lose focus. Historians still argue whether these long, punishing sessions contributed to that trademark royal stillness. Some think it was symbolic discipline, others believe it was simply the exhaustion of keeping still under the weight of costume and expectation. But either way, the result was the same. An entire visual language built around the suppression of human warmth. And yet, there's something mesmerizing about that blankness. You find yourself staring at her painted face later on, centuries later in a museum, wondering who she really was. Did she ever laugh? Did she ever sneak a grin at someone behind the easel? Did the painter, perhaps out of pity or quiet rebellion, paint the faintest ghost of a smile that no one else noticed? Art historians today use words like serenity, nobility, and grace to describe her expression. But you suspect fatigue, fear, and pins under her collar might be closer to the truth. You look around the studio again. The air is smoky with turpentine and candle soot. The painter's brush moves in delicate circles. He pauses every few minutes to step back, squint, nod, and mutter something about divinity. The model sits motionless, her back straight, her lips sealed like a promise she'll never be allowed to break. It's strange to think how art and pain became so intertwined in this world. The calmness of her face is the calmness of someone trapped in ritual. Her lack of a smile isn't a lack of emotion, it's a performance, a mask, a contract. And beneath it all, you can almost sense the pulse of rebellion, the desire to move, to breathe, to be human again. A single bead of sweat slides down her temple. The painter ignores it, pretending not to see the humanity in his subject. He's painting a symbol, not a person. You remember how you smiled absent-mindedly in a photo once and thought nothing of it. For her, that simple act could mean impropriety. Too much emotion might imply instability. Too much warmth could make her seem vulnerable to gossip, or worse, suggest that she was not entirely under her husband's divine influence. In short, a smile could destroy her. And so she sits there, marble still, trying to project an eternity she doesn't feel. The brushstrokes take on the quality of time itself, slow, deliberate, unavoidable. You lean in just enough to imagine what the painter sees. The face is soft, almost translucent. The eyes follow you faintly. The mouth is still. But in that stillness, there's power. Because if she can't control her life, she can at least control her image. The session goes on until the candles gutter low. The painter sets down his brush with trembling hands. "Majesty," he says quietly, "it is done." She nods, the movement tiny, rehearsed, perfect. She doesn't ask to see the result. Royal women seldom did. They trusted that the portrait would show them not as they were, but as they were supposed to be. Outside, the night waits, soft and starless. The wind presses faintly against the leaded glass. You can almost hear the echo of silence she leaves behind, a silence that lasts for centuries inside gilded frames and museum halls. And somewhere, between those layers of varnish and dust, the first question of our journey hangs quietly in the dark. Did royal women stop smiling because they were told not to? Or because, eventually, they forgot how? You find yourself walking through the echoing nave of an old cathedral, its arches dissolving into candle-lit haze. The air smells faintly of wax and centuries. Somewhere in the shadows a choir hums, a long, low note that feels older than history itself. And suddenly you realize, before queens were ever painted, saints were. Their faces stare down from every corner, stone, wood, glass, each one perfectly still. No open mouths, no bright laughter, not even a hint of human warmth. Just serenity carved and painted into eternity. The people who built this world didn't want saints who looked happy. They wanted saints who looked holy. And holiness, as you're about to learn, didn't smile. It's strange, isn't it? You think of joy as divine, but in medieval Europe, joy was suspicious, especially on a woman's face. Artists were trained under the church's gaze, painting the Virgin Mary as the ultimate model of composure, compassionate, yes, but never amused. You glance up at her, tall, pale, gentle, and realize she's the prototype for every royal portrait that came after. A saint's calmness was a form of control. A smile, by contrast, hinted at the body, at pleasure, at sin, at things better left unspoken in candlelit cathedrals. Laughter belonged to the tavern, not the altar. You imagine a young painter in the 1400s hunched over a panel of wood, trying to catch the Virgin's serenity. His teacher leans over and says, "Too much warmth in the lips, boy, and she looks like she's enjoying herself." So the brush softens, the lines harden, and one more generation of emotion gets wiped clean from art. Historians still argue whether this sacred restraint began as a theological principle or an aesthetic habit that hardened into dogma. Either way, by the time royal courts took over the business of art, that solemn ideal had become second nature. Queens would inherit not only crowns but expressions. You step outside the cathedral, blinking against the morning light. The cobblestones are slick with dew. You hear laughter somewhere, a group of merchants at the corner market, but up ahead, where the palace rises in pale stone, the sound dies away. Inside those marble walls, smiles have been banished. The early royal courts were obsessed with projecting divine authority. Monarchs ruled by the grace of God, and their portraits had to show it. A laughing queen looked human, and being human was far too fragile a thing to hang a crown on. Picture the young Queen of France, maybe 15 years old, posing for her first official portrait. She's been told to embody serenity, which really means obedience. Her ladies-in-waiting hover like silent ghosts, fixing her sleeves, reminding her, "Do not part your lips, do not squint, do not under any circumstances smile." You might think that sounds cruel, but it was simply the language of power. Every visual cue in a royal portrait whispered, "I am not like you." Her face must be a mask of divine calm. The painter's brush must capture something eternal, not a passing mood. Emotions fade, power must not. Somewhere in the back of your mind, a small voice wonders how that must have felt, to have your face turned into theology. There's a legend about one painter, anonymous of course, who dared to give a duchess a hint of pleasure in her expression. When the painting was unveiled, her husband accused her of vanity. The work was burned, and the artist disappeared soon after. Whether that story's true or not, it captures the mood perfectly. A woman's face was never her own to control, and the church approved. Stillness was a virtue, sobriety of spirit, piety made visible. Even laughter was regulated. Theologians warned that excessive mirth opened the gates of sin. One bishop famously declared that the devil entered the world through smiling women. You can't make this stuff up. Well, they did, but still. You pause, standing now in a royal gallery centuries later, looking at portrait after portrait, the same faces, the same frozen lips, the same hollow serenity. They look almost cloned. If you squint, the calm becomes eerie, as if the women in those paintings have been gently exorcised of their humanity. One of them, a queen from the late 1500s, has eyes that seem to plead with you. I was alive once. I just wasn't allowed to show it. The painter must have known. You can see it in the brushwork. A softness at the corners of her mouth, a secret tenderness the patron probably never noticed. He was playing with fire, slipping humanity into holiness. And here's a quirky tidbit for you. Some early manuals for court painters literally instructed artists to paint serenity, not joy. The reasoning? Joy was too easily misread. Imagine that. Centuries of female rulers edited for fear of being misunderstood. The rule lasted so long it outlived religion itself. Even after the Enlightenment dimmed the Church's power, the visual vocabulary of piety stuck. Calm faces meant control. Smiles still meant scandal. It's the oldest form of branding, really. Queens were expected to represent divine stability in a world constantly falling apart. Wars, plagues, assassinations, bankruptcies. A smiling monarch during crisis looked careless. A smiling queen looked dangerous. You trace the line from those sacred Madonnas to those royal portraits, and you realize what started as worship became politics. Every royal woman from Spain to England to Russia was performing a centuries-old miracle, turning flesh into symbol, and that symbol couldn't laugh, or the illusion would crumble. You walk through the imaginary corridor of portraits one more time. Hundreds of faces gaze back at you, still and patient, and you can almost hear their silence. It isn't sad silence, it's disciplined, trained, the kind that's passed down like a family heirloom, worn on the face instead of around the neck. You leave the gallery and step out into the cool night. Somewhere far away, a modern camera flashes. A royal wave follows, a soft smile, carefully measured. It's strange how much that one small curve of the lips still carries centuries of history behind it. Back then, holiness forbade smiling. Now it's just PR training. You wake in a quieter world now, a palace corridor muffled by velvet drapes and heavy silence. The torches flicker like shy courtiers. Beyond a set of gilded doors, a painter's apprentice scurries past you, arms full of brushes and powdered pigments. And as you follow, soft steps echoing on marble, you begin to understand the strange language of power that once ruled faces. Inside, a queen sits beneath a canopy of crimson silk, surrounded by mirrors, though she never looks directly into any of them. She's waiting for her portrait to begin, her spine perfect, her lips pale and still. There's no vanity here, there's duty. The painter bows so low his hair brushes the ground. When he rises, he keeps his eyes on her reflection, not her face. To look too boldly at a monarch, especially a female one, could be mistaken for intimacy. And in this court, intimacy is treason. You settle quietly in the corner, half invisible in the shadows as the queen adjusts the lace at her wrist. She doesn't speak. No one does. You can almost hear the tension humming between them, the painter's nerves, her control. One wrong expression, and the canvas could undo them both. Majesty, the painter murmurs, if you would remain as you are. Of course she will. She's been trained for this. Every queen has. In this age, you learn, a woman's power is measured not by what she shows, but by what she withholds. The face must convey command without aggression, calm without coldness, and distance without cruelty. It's a delicate dance, and the smile, that simple act of humanity, ruins the choreography. Historians still argue whether this rigid composure came from tradition or terror. Perhaps it's both. Monarchs lived under constant scrutiny. A misinterpreted gesture could ripple through court gossip, cross borders, even into rebellion. To smile too freely was to risk seeming unserious, or worse, inviting ridicule from men who saw authority as their birthright. You lean closer as the painter's brush glides over the canvas. Every stroke feels like a negotiation between truth and propaganda. He's not just painting her, he's constructing a story. Here sits a woman who needs no approval, who reigns by grace alone, who will never be mocked by history. It's strange how silence can roar louder than laughter. The courtiers behind you whisper. Not words exactly, but the rustle of fabric, the faint click of pearls. They know the rules too. No one must look too pleased in the presence of the queen. Her gravity demands theirs. You think of modern photo ops, the way politicians rehearse their smiles, every tooth a focus-grouped decision. But back then there was no rehearsal, just instinct. You learned to wear composure like armor, because everyone else was waiting for you to falter. One tiny twitch at the corner of the mouth could suggest pride, seduction, defiance. All the things a good queen should not embody. And yet, paradoxically, she must look captivating. It's like threading a needle through ice, beauty without warmth, grace without approachability. In portraits, this paradox becomes haunting. Her face, flawless but motionless, seems carved from snow. The painter has captured majesty but also melancholy. You almost expect her to blink, to exhale, to admit she's tired, but she won't. He paints her eyes slightly downward, a trick borrowed from religious iconography. The gaze appears humble, pious, safe. The chin tilts just enough to suggest nobility. The lips, closed in perfect proportion, radiate authority. Every brushstroke obeys protocol. And yet, hidden in those cold tones, something human survives, a ghost of warmth that refuses to die. The painter knows it. You can see it in the way he hesitates before touching her lips. To him, the mouth is dangerous territory, a battlefield between what's expected and what's real. He settles for ambiguity. The result is that enigmatic royal knot smile, a faint tension that could be serenity or sadness, pride or pain. You've seen it countless times in museums without realizing it was a political invention. The more you study her, the more her stillness starts to feel alive. There's power in refusal, the power to deny the world access to your inner life. And it wasn't just vanity. In a society where women's reputations were as fragile as glass, a serene face was insurance. A smile could be misread as flirtation, and flirtation could destroy dynasties. Take, for instance, Catherine de' Medici, the woman who ruled France through cunning rather than charm. Her portraits show a face of pure marble, inscrutable, calculating, nearly severe. But that's the point. Her stillness was her strategy. She survived assassinations, betrayals, and revolts, not because she smiled, but because she didn't. Meanwhile, her rival, Diane de Poitiers, beautiful, smiling, radiant, became a scandal in paint. Her youthful portrait, lips slightly parted, caused whispers across Europe. Was she seducing the painter? Was she mocking propriety? Was she simply being alive? The church hated it. Courtiers feared it. The king loved it, which made it 10 times worse. So, over time, royal women learned the safest face was no face at all. You glance around the portrait room again. The silence feels heavier now. You can sense the centuries of control layered in each painting, 1,000 generations of women learning to speak through stillness. There's a tiny crack in the paint above the Queen's painted mouth. You imagine, for a ridiculous second, that it's her trying to smile through history, just a fissure of rebellion beneath the varnish. You almost laugh quietly because even that idea feels dangerous. And then, just before the painter signs his name, the Queen finally moves. Only slightly. She lifts her eyes, meets his for half a heartbeat. He freezes. It's not quite a smile, but something stirs there. A flicker of kindness, of exhaustion, maybe even pity. Then she looks away again. The mask reforms. He pretends it never happened. Later, when the painting hangs in the Great Hall, everyone praises its majesty. No one notices that one brush stroke, the faintest suggestion of life at the corners of her lips. But if you stand close enough, really close, you might see it. A whisper of humanity buried beneath the paint. A smile that dared not speak its name. You wake again to the faint sound of brushes being washed in turpentine. The rhythm soft, repetitive, almost hypnotic. The workshop smells of linseed oil and pigment dust. A new day, another royal commission, another face to immortalize without emotion. You're standing now behind the master painter himself, the same man who, last night, captured the Queen's frozen calm. His hands tremble slightly as he prepares his next canvas. There's tension in the air, but not the creative kind. You can sense it. The sort of anxiety that comes from knowing your work might one day get you executed. Because as odd as it sounds, painting a royal face was a deadly serious business. He looks over his shoulder before mixing his colours, as if the walls might be listening. They usually are. Spies hide in plain sight. Assistants, servants, courtiers, pretending to admire the artwork. A misplaced brushstroke, an unintended frown, a too soft expression, any of it could offend the crown. You remember that painter from earlier, the one who dared to suggest warmth. Gone now, erased from memory, like a line scraped from wet plaster. In this studio, everything is political. The sitter arrives, another noblewoman, this time a duchess, younger, but already practiced in the art of restraint. She greets the painter with a nod that's more command than courtesy. Her gown rustles like dry leaves. You notice how her expression never changes, as though her face was stitched into that neutral line long before she entered the room. "Sit," he says softly, and relax, relax. A word that means something very different here. It means compose yourself, forget you're human, become legend. You watch the painter start his work, sketching delicate outlines, trying to capture the impossible, presence without personality. His hand moves quickly at first, then slows. He knows where the danger lies. Around the mouth, around the eyes. Too much softness, and she looks flirtatious. Too much sharpness, and she looks cruel. Either way, he could lose his patronage, or worse. Historians still argue whether royal artists were truly free or merely glorified servants, maybe both. But make no mistake, a single brushstroke could make or break fortunes. You think of Hans Holbein, the master of subtlety. His portraits of Tudor courtiers were praised for their precision and feared for their honesty. Henry VIII once commissioned him to paint a potential bride, Anne of Cleves. Holbein's version made her look radiant. The king agreed to marry her sight unseen, but when Anne arrived in England, Henry took one look and declared her a Flanders mare. Holbein barely survived the fallout. Others would not have. You can almost hear the whispering in the court corridors. The painter deceived him. The queen displeased him. Who will pay for it? A portrait wasn't art, it was evidence. It could destroy alliances, rewrite treaties, fuel rumours of infidelity or impotence. And when the subject was a royal woman, the stakes doubled. Her image represented dynastic stability, moral virtue, and political worth, all in one fragile face. Imagine painting under those conditions. Your job is to make her look beautiful, but not too beautiful, youthful, but not vain, dignified, but not severe, alive, but not emotional. A single smirk could spark speculation about her loyalties or her lovers. You watch the painter now, his shoulders tight with focus. He works with microscopic care, each line of pigment a tiny act of diplomacy. Then the beat, a sound. The door creaks open. A court official steps in, dressed in black velvet, holding a parchment sealed with red wax. He's here to observe, which means to judge. The painter bows, the Duchess doesn't. She stares straight ahead, as though she's not even in her own body. The official paces behind them, murmuring about appropriate modesty, regal bearing, divine stillness. And suddenly it hits you. This isn't art, it's theatre. Everyone here is performing. The Duchess for her reputation, the painter for his survival, the observer for his report. You can't help but feel for them both. He adds a final highlight to the cheek, carefully dulling the glow so she doesn't appear flushed. The mouth remains neutral, neither pleased nor displeased. In truth, it's a masterpiece of nothingness, but that's the goal. You wonder what happens to all the emotion that gets swallowed by these portraits. Does it evaporate? Or does it stay trapped inside the paint, sealed behind the varnish, waiting centuries for someone to notice? As you think this, a small moment happens, so quick you almost miss it. The Duchess exhales. Her posture slips just enough to betray exhaustion. The painter glances up, startled by the humanity of it. Their eyes meet, a shared recognition that neither of them belongs to themselves anymore. Then, just as fast, she straightens again, the mask reassembling itself. He paints her as if it never happened. Later that evening, when the official is gone, he sits alone by the fire, staring at the half-finished canvas. He touches the edge of the painted mouth. The tiniest curve, ambiguous, unreadable. Was that his rebellion? A whisper of empathy hidden inside the rules. Some artists of the era were known to do this, to hide small, coded gestures of truth. A relaxed hand here, a softened gaze there. These weren't accidents, they were acts of quiet mercy. There's a famous rumour, maybe true, maybe not, about an apprentice who once painted a princess smiling gently in a background sketchbook. When his master discovered it, he burned the page and scolded him, "You'll make her mortal." And that's the paradox, isn't it? The goal of royal portraiture was to make the subject immortal by stripping away everything that made her human. You look at the finished painting now, the Duchess stares past you, frozen forever in her perfect calm. Around her, the pigments shimmer faintly under the candlelight. She looks untouchable, the kind of face you'd bow to, not confide in. The painter signs his name in the bottom corner, small and trembling. He knows this portrait could hang for centuries, or be destroyed within days if someone misreads its silence. When he finally blows out the candles, the room sinks into shadow. Only the painting remains, glowing faintly in the dark, a ghost of control, of fear, of performance. And in the quiet, you can almost hear her breathing through the brushstrokes, whispering something the painter never dared to record. "I am alive in here." You drift forward through centuries and find yourself standing on a cobblestone street in Florence. The year is 1503, the sky is a soft watercolour grey, and the Arno River moves lazily past rows of sunlit houses. There's something electric in the air, like a rumour, travelling faster than the wind itself. Every workshop window seems to buzz with talk of a single face, the woman whose smile would change the world. You step inside one of these studios, ducking beneath drying canvases and hanging garlands of herbs, meant to chase away the smell of paint. In the centre stands a tall, distracted man in dusty clothes, his dark eyes half in this world and half in the next. Leonardo da Vinci, restless, brilliant, always a little late for everything, including history itself. And sitting before him is Lisa Gherardini, the wife of a wealthy merchant. The world will later call her the Mona Lisa, but for now she's just another commission, except that Leonardo seems obsessed. He's been painting her for months, maybe years, depending on which historian you ask. He can't stop tinkering, layering, softening. You watch as he adds a nearly invisible curve to her mouth, a suggestion of life so subtle it feels like an accident. You lean closer. There it is. That half-smile. Not quite happiness, not quite amusement. It's the look of someone who knows something you don't, and maybe never will. Leonardo leans back, squinting. "There," he murmurs, "that's enough." But of course it isn't. In a world where queens and duchesses are painted like marble statues, this woman suddenly looks alive. And people don't know what to do with that. Her smile is an earthquake, disguised as a whisper. At first, no one quite notices. The painting sits quietly in his workshop, half-finished, collecting dust and mystery. But when it's finally seen by others, reactions are mixed. Some say she's mocking them, others insist she's flirting. A few whisper that she must be a sinner, to smile so knowingly in a portrait. Historians still argue whether Lisa was even smiling intentionally, or whether Leonardo's technique, called sfumato, just created the illusion of one. But the scandal wasn't in the technique, it was in the suggestion that a woman could possess her own secret interior world, visible and invisible at once. You glance around the workshop. Paintings of saints and noblemen surround you, all stiff, obedient, serene. And then right in the middle, this quiet rebellion, a face that dares to breathe. It's easy to forget how radical that was. Royal women had spent centuries being told that stillness equaled virtue. The Mona Lisa broke that code without a single word. No jewels, no crown, no lace ruff, just a woman existing calmly, confidently, with a trace of humour. Leonardo probably didn't set out to defy tradition, but artists rarely know when they're rewriting the rules. He was obsessed with the science of the human face. How muscles shifted, how light caught a moving smile, how emotion flickered beneath the skin. So he painted her as though she were about to speak. That illusion haunted everyone who saw it, because for the first time a painted woman looked real, not idealized, not holy, not owned, just real. You can almost hear the ripple it sent through the art world. Portraitists started experimenting, cautiously adding hints of emotion to their sitters. A little curve in the mouth here, a softened eye there. But the church and the courts were quick to snap back. Smiling women, after all, were dangerous women, and royalty, especially royalty, couldn't afford danger. A queen's image was propaganda. Her serenity was state policy. The Mona Lisa's smile, while enchanting, was precisely the kind of expression a royal painter would be ordered to erase. In France, the courts of François I adored Leonardo's masterpiece, but not as a model to imitate. The king kept it for himself, locked away as treasure, not truth. To the nobility, Lisa's smile wasn't something to repeat, it was something to possess. You walk now through centuries of imitation that never quite dared to imitate. Painters borrowed Leonardo's light, his shading, his composition, but never that smile. The risk was too high. Because here's the secret no one said out loud. A smile makes the viewer wonder what you're thinking. And powerful men, especially the ones commissioning portraits, didn't like women who looked like they had thoughts. Still, the echo of that smile lingered. You can see its faint traces in the works of later masters. Titian's soft glances, Bronzino's uneasy half-grins, even Elizabeth Thoren's icy calm. The tension between composure and rebellion became a new aesthetic language, the art of pretending to feel nothing while suggesting everything. It's as though after Lisa, the world of portraiture could never fully go back to silence. You move closer to the original painting again, housed now under glass, surrounded by 1,000 tourists and 1 billion pixels online. Her eyes follow you. Or do they? That's the trick, isn't it? The illusion of sentience, of choice. You get the eerie feeling that if she wanted to, she could step right out of the frame, shake her head at 500 years of art history, and say, "I was never the mystery you were." You smile back, caught in her spell. And for a moment, you understand what terrified those old monarchs so much, that a woman who smiles owns her own story. Back then, that was revolutionary. Today, it's still a little rare. The gallery fades around you, the crowd's murmurs softening into sleep. You're left with her gaze, calm and eternal, whispering through time. The smile that shook Florence wasn't just a smile, it was a quiet declaration of freedom. And from that moment on, every royal woman would have to choose, stay marble or risk being human. You open your eyes to the faint scent of rosewater and lead. The air feels heavy, perfumed but wrong, like flowers blooming inside a locked room. You're no longer in Florence. The candles are thicker now, the gowns grander, the stakes higher. You're standing in a royal dressing chamber, part vanity, part laboratory, part silent confession booth, and at its centre sits a queen, motionless before a mirror, her face a pale masterpiece of artifice. An attendant grinds powders in a small marble bowl, white lead, vinegar, maybe a touch of arsenic, if her ladyship prefers the glow. The fumes rise, ghostly and sweet, mingling with the hum of beeswax candles. On a tray nearby, rouge, patches, coal, and something called Venetian ceruse, a fashionable poison every bit as essential as her crown. You can almost feel the sting of it as the attendant applies it layer by layer, a mask of authority, a film of survival. Her skin loses colour, her pores disappear, her humanity fades, and beneath it all her muscles stay perfectly still, because smiling would crack the paint, literally. The chemicals used in cosmetics at the time, lead, mercury, even powdered bone, hardened when dry. Smiling could cause the surface to flake or split. Imagine holding court, terrified that one misplaced grin might not only ruin your reputation, but also physically shatter your face. It sounds absurd until you see her reflection. There she is, radiant, unearthly, immaculate. She doesn't look alive anymore, but that's precisely the goal. In an age obsessed with control, nothing was more unsettling than a woman who appeared too vital. Historians still argue whether these beauty rituals were acts of vanity or desperation, but look closer. They were also armor. Royal women didn't have the luxury of letting their faces betray them, so they layered powder like soldiers layered steel. And lead, as everyone learned too late, didn't just sit on the skin, it seeped in. You notice her hands tremble slightly as the attendant paints her lips with vermilion. Her hairline, receding from years of toxic paste, is hidden beneath pearls and veils. Her teeth, what remain of them, ache constantly. Smiling hurts, but then so does everything else about being royal. There's something both tragic and magnificent about the ritual. These women were crafting divinity out of decay, turning sickness into splendor, poison into polish. You remember a strange tidbit you once read. Queen Elizabeth I's legendary mask of youth, a mixture of white lead and vinegar, gave her that perfect, deathly pallor. Courtiers described her as glowing, radiant, angelic. But by her later years, her skin was blistered and grey beneath the mask. She kept layering more and more to hide it, until her servants were forbidden to remove her makeup even after death. She didn't just wear the mask, she became it, and she wasn't alone. Across Europe, noblewomen shared recipes for complexion waters and miracle creams that promised eternal beauty. The ingredients list read like an alchemist's curse: mercury for brightness, arsenic for smoothness, vinegar for purity. The irony is that these very potions made their smiles vanish, not just socially but physically. The lips cracked, the teeth blackened, the gums receded, the jaw stiffened. It wasn't just about vanity anymore, it was about survival through image. To rule meant to appear untouchable. To appear untouchable meant to look flawless, and to look flawless meant to suffer in silence. You can almost hear the whisper of silk as she rises now, layers of fabric rustling like applause for her own endurance. The attendant adjusts the final touch. A pearl drop earring that gleams like a tear she'll never be allowed to shed. In the mirror, she catches your eye. You swear for a second her reflection is aware of you. There's something fierce there. Not quite sadness, not quite defiance, but something older, It's the expression of someone who's learned to weaponize stillness, because in this court, smiling wasn't just discouraged, it was dangerous. It hinted at pleasure, and pleasure hinted at sin. The church's shadow still loomed over every powdered cheek and polished pearl. The Virgin Mary didn't smile. Why should a queen? Besides, modesty was beauty, or so they said. You notice the way her attendants avoid eye contact. They're not supposed to see her transform, only the result. Her silence rules the room like gravity. And yet beneath all that stillness, there's the faintest twitch at the corner of her mouth. Not a smile, but the memory of one. It's as if her body remembers laughter even after her world forbade it. The painter from before enters quietly, bowing low. He doesn't dare look at her directly. His brush will record her as divine perfection. But you, standing here in this impossible moment, can see the cost of it. Her beauty is pain disguised as peace. Her serenity is exhaustion rebranded as grace. And as the painter sets to work, you realize that the stillness of royal women wasn't natural. It was cultivated chemically and culturally. They were frozen twice, by expectation and by poison. It makes you wonder, did they even know what their real faces looked like anymore? You step closer to the mirror, half expecting your own reflection to wear that same expression, that careful, neutral calm that hides too much. For centuries, historians described these women as composed, elegant, refined. But maybe the truth was more brutal. Maybe they were simply enduring. The painter begins to hum softly, something gentle, almost apologetic, as his brush glides over the canvas. He doesn't paint her as she is, but as the world demands her to be, faultless, untouchable, unknowable. Outside, bells toll across the palace gardens. The air thickens with incense and dust. The queen exhales, barely audible, and the crack of drying lead makeup sounds faintly like breaking porcelain. She doesn't flinch, because to smile, to move, would undo the illusion. And illusions here are the only things keeping the crown from crumbling. The corridors of the palace are hushed tonight, lined with torchlight that glimmers like trapped stars against the marble. You walk slowly, following the echo of footsteps down a hallway where portraits of queens and princesses stare down at you still, perfect, impenetrable. Their faces are all serenity and poise, but you can't shake the feeling that behind those painted eyes, something is clenched tight. And then you remember something you heard once in a whisper. A royal smile could start a war. It sounds absurd. How could a curve of the lips unmake empires? But in this world where portraits serve as politics, where a face travels where the body cannot, an expression becomes as dangerous as an army. You find yourself stepping into a small antechamber filled with canvases, maps and letters sealed in red wax. This is where diplomacy begins, not with words, but with images. The portraits of noble brides painted and shipped across borders are the first ambassadors of marriage alliances. A single smirk or soft gaze might shift the balance of kingdoms. You run your fingers over a rolled parchment, an old diplomatic missive from the Spanish court. It warns that a certain princess's portrait shows too much joy, and therefore too little modesty. The match was cancelled. A smile, it seems, can end a treaty faster than an insult. You imagine the poor artist summoned to defend his brushstroke. He insists the expression was accidental, merely the shadow of light. But the damage is done. One nation feels mocked, another insulted. Armies move, or nearly do, all because a woman's painted mouth dared to hint at emotion. Historians still argue whether these cancelled unions were truly about politics or pride, but either way it's clear that every royal smile carried the weight of nations. Picture it, a young princess in Spain, barely 16, posing for her marriage portrait. She's to be sent to France to marry a man she's never met for a peace she doesn't believe in. The painter instructs her to appear mild and gracious. The courtiers murmur that her lips should remain closed in keeping with the virtue of chastity. But the girl, exhausted by the endless posing, sighs. Her expression softens for just a second, a faint, natural lift at the corners of her mouth. The painter, nervous but inspired, leaves it in. When the portrait arrives in France, it causes uproar. The French courtiers say she looks sly, mocking, impertinent. She smiles like she knows something, one ambassador writes. The alliance collapses within weeks. She never even leaves Spain. You pause, stunned by how fragile everything was. The most powerful empires in the world, undone by pigment and interpretation. It makes sense when you think about it. In an age before photography, before first-hand impressions, a portrait was reality. And a smile, ambiguous, slippery, uncontrollable, was too dangerous to risk. So royal women learned the new rule. Diplomacy begins with the mouth closed. You walk through another room where envoys from different nations examine fresh portraits, pretending to discuss art while actually studying faces like battle plans. The men debate tones, posture, fabrics, but what they're really reading is emotion, or the lack of it. She looks humble, says one. She looks too human, says another. She looks alive, mutters a third, almost offended. A queen's stillness, you realize, wasn't just aesthetic, it was strategic camouflage. A frozen face could not be misread, and yet the tension was impossible to sustain. Somewhere between the brush and the throne, humanity always tried to break through. There's a small, nearly forgotten story about Margaret Tudor, sister to Henry VIII, whose portrait was sent to Scotland to secure her marriage to King James IV. When he finally met her in person, he was stunned to find she smiled easily and laughed loudly. He adored her for it, but the courtiers whispered, "The English queen is too free." That same laughter would later turn to scandal when her husband died and she remarried. Freedom, it seemed, always came with a cost. You move closer to one of the hanging portraits, a woman draped in pearls, her chin tilted just so, her lips flat and firm. She's beautiful, yes, but it's the beauty of a sealed envelope. You wonder what she thought while posing. Was she terrified her image might offend? Did she worry that the smile she suppressed might still flicker through the eyes, betraying her? Because a smile could say 1,000 forbidden things. It could imply desire, dissent, conspiracy. It could whisper, "I know something you don't." And in royal courts, knowledge was power and power was male. So a woman's smile, a flash of hidden thought, became not just inappropriate, but dangerous. Painters adapted. They developed an entire visual vocabulary for restraint, lips gently pressed, eyes turned modestly downward, hands folded as if in prayer. Composure became the highest form of elegance. Still, in rare portraits you catch a trace of rebellion, a flicker at the mouth too subtle to erase. Perhaps it was intentional, perhaps not. But it's there, haunting the varnish like a ghost. You think of those artists who dared to break the rules, Holbein, Velázquez, even Goya centuries later, men who understood that stillness was sometimes the loudest scream. They painted royal women not as divine symbols, but as living contradictions, strong yet trapped, graceful yet suffocating. One of Goya's later duchesses even stares straight at you, lips pressed but defiant, her eyes alive with challenge. You can almost hear her say, "You can take my smile, but not my mind." The irony is that for all their power, royal women weren't free to own the most basic expression of joy. Every grin could be treason, every glance a statement. And so they learned the art of silence, of using everything except the mouth to speak. The tilt of a head, the weight of a gaze, the exact tension between serenity and sadness. You step back into the dim corridor again. The portraits stare down, their faces unchanging. They were made to preserve peace, but the peace they guarded was heavy, suffocating, eternal. In their stillness, you can almost hear the echo of that quiet rule, whispered from queen to queen across generations. Never smile. Someone might think you mean it. The sound of footsteps echoes softly through the palace corridor. Small, quick, disciplined. You follow the rhythm until it opens into a long gallery lined with portraits of royal children. Cherubic faces, rosy cheeks, silken gowns, painted perfection. Yet even among these tender scenes, something is off. None of them smile. Their expressions are miniature imitations of their mothers, composed, poised, oddly adult. You realize that this calm detachment isn't learned at court, it's taught long before. This is where it begins, in the nursery. You find yourself standing in a grand, echoing chamber with latticed windows filtering morning light. A young princess sits upright on a small stool, while her governess adjusts the folds of her training gown. Every movement is choreographed, every word chosen with care. "Back straight," the governess murmurs, hands folded, eyes soft, mouth closed. It's less a lesson in manners than an early rehearsal for a lifetime of performance. The child's lip trembles, the governess frowns. Not that. No trembling. And just like that, emotion is replaced with etiquette. You watch the girl's shoulders stiffen. She's perhaps 8 years old and already learning that her face belongs not to her, but to the crown. Her smile, her laughter, her tears, all potential liabilities. By the time she's 12, her tutors will teach her how to stand, how to breathe, even how to blink. There's a precise rhythm to noble restraint. Blink too often, and you look nervous. Too little, and you look cold. The ideal is a kind of living portrait, serene, balanced, blank. Historians still argue whether this emotional training was deliberate indoctrination or simply the byproduct of a hierarchical world obsessed with appearances. But the effect was the same. From infancy, royal daughters learned to equate composure with safety. You glance at the governess again, adjusting the child's chin. Her tone is gentle, but her eyes betray the fear beneath it. She knows one misplaced gesture could spark gossip in the palace corridors. Gossip that might reach the Queen's ears and cost her position. So the lesson continues. "Remember, my lady," she says softly, "the court sees everything. You must never show surprise, never frown, never giggle." The child nods. You can almost feel the weight of that silence pressing in. It's not cruel exactly, just inevitable. In a world where women's worth was measured by how well they represented their families, emotion was a dangerous luxury. A royal girl's destiny wasn't to express herself, it was to embody ideals, obedience, virtue, grace. And grace, by definition, must never sweat, strain, or smile too broadly. You wander through her childhood as if through a quiet museum. There she is at 10, learning to curtsy so deeply it nearly topples her. At 12, practicing the neutral gaze for court appearances. At 14, watching her mother's face in the mirror and copying its exact stillness. Every lesson refines the mask. You remember reading once that the daughters of Catherine de' Medici were so carefully schooled in restraint that even when one of them fell from her horse in public, she rose without a sound. "A princess," her tutor wrote approvingly, "does not wince." It's strange to think that this discipline, so admired in portraits, was forged through small daily denials. Each unexpressed laugh, each swallowed fear, became another brushstroke in the royal performance. And when the painter finally came, years later, the young woman would sit as though she'd been preparing for that moment her whole life. Her training ensured she'd never smile by accident. There's something both haunting and impressive about that. You watch her at 16 now, seated for her first official portrait. Her governess stands just outside the frame, whispering reminders. Hold still. Think of something noble. Think of peace. The painter hesitates. He's used to working with merchants' wives who fidget and chatter and smile without restraint. This is different. The girl's composure is unnerving, her stillness almost otherworldly. When he lifts his brush, she doesn't even blink. He paints quickly, layering shadow and light. Her face emerges, calm, perfect, impersonal. It's astonishing. The kind of beauty that feels both alive and embalmed. When he finishes, he steps back, sighing. "Majesty," he murmurs, though she's not queen yet. "You were born for this." And in a way she was. But as the room empties, she stays seated for a moment longer. Her hands unclasp slightly, her posture slumps just enough to reveal fatigue. Then she does something small, fleeting. She smiles. Not for the painter, not for the court, just for herself. It's the kind of smile that vanishes the moment it appears, but in that split second, you catch a glimpse of what all that training buried, the real person, breathing beneath the persona. You imagine how many royal children grew up the same way, perfecting silence, performing calm, suppressing the most human instinct of all, to grin when something is funny, to laugh when something hurts. That habit didn't fade with age, it hardened. By adulthood, restraint was no longer a lesson, it was identity. Even their private moments weren't safe. Maids reported to ministers, companions repeated conversations, smiles became clues. So they smiled only in their dreams. You step back into the gallery of portraits, looking again at the faces of those children now grown and gone. Their painted calm suddenly looks tragic, almost tender. Behind every one of those expressions there was once a little girl told not to laugh. And maybe, centuries later, that's why we still look at their portraits and feel uneasy, because deep down we recognize that kind of silence. It's the silence of someone who learned too early that showing joy might cost them everything. The room around you shifts again. Walls of velvet dissolve into the dim glow of a candle-lit studio, then reform into something far colder. A court painter's chamber in 17th century London. The smell of oil and dust mingles with perfume and ambition, and in the centre a royal woman sits, not as a person but as an instruction. You can tell instantly who designed the scene. Not the artist, he's just the hand. The true author is the gaze hovering above him. A king, a husband, a courtier, a whole patriarchal world demanding that she appear exactly as they wish her to be. That's the secret of this place. Every portrait of a royal woman is really a collaboration between three forces: the sitter, the artist, and the unseen man deciding how the world should see her. You stand at the edge of the room and listen to the painter mutter measurements. The eyes must be modest, Majesty. The mouth should rest. A hint of virtue here. He gestures vaguely at her cheek, as if purity could be blended with pigment. She nods. She knows the rules better than he does, because in this century the female face is territory, owned, mapped, and guarded. Smiles invite invasion. The model's name could be Henrietta Maria, or Anne of Austria, or any number of women who learned that even a raised eyebrow could be labelled sedition. You can't quite tell which queen you're watching, because their portraits all start to blend together. Same skin, same gaze, same silence. "Virtue is symmetry," says the painter, quoting some manual written by a bishop who has never held a brush. He mixes his paints carefully, a little carmine for grace, a touch of umber for humility. Every shade of womanhood approved by theology and throne. It's exhausting to watch. You think about the words people use for female expressions. When a man looks serious, he's dignified. When a woman does, she's cold. When she smiles, she's foolish. When she laughs, she's obscene. Somewhere between those judgments, royal women had to live entire lives. Historians still argue whether they believed in their own portraits or simply endured them. The truth is probably somewhere in the middle. You step closer to the canvas as it begins to take form. The painter's brush hesitates at the lips, that eternal battlefield. The queen's jaw tightens almost imperceptibly. You can feel the tension in the room shift. One of the courtiers clears his throat. "Too much warmth," he says. "The archbishop might find it unseemly." The painter swallows hard and adjusts the angle of the mouth until it disappears into polite ambiguity. There, safe again. It's hard not to laugh at the absurdity of it, but laughter would echo too loud in this room. You realize, standing there, that these portraits weren't lies, they were contracts. The monarch promises piety, the people promise obedience. And in that silent exchange the woman disappears. But the strangest part is how that erasure became beautiful. The blank face, the unreadable calm, was celebrated as the height of refinement. Men called it the repose of virtue. A repose so total it resembled death. In private, though, there were cracks in the mask. Letters survive, scribbled notes between queens and their ladies, full of jokes and warmth and wicked humour. One French duchess wrote, "They paint us as saints, but we laugh like sailors." You can almost hear the mischief in her voice. Of course, those letters were never meant to be seen. You walk past the half-finished portrait toward a table cluttered with engravings. Here you see the male gaze in full bloom, women reclining, smiling coyly, their modesty framed by mythological excuses. Venus, Diana, Charity. The same features, only free because they're pretending not to be real. That's the double standard carved into history. A queen must appear sacred, but an idealized goddess could grin without consequence. So painters learned to split womanhood in two, holy and human, and keep the halves forever apart. Somewhere in that division, the royal smile died. You glance back at the queen. The sitting is nearly done. Her face glows faintly in the candlelight, perfect and unreachable. She looks at her reflection in a small mirror, and for just a moment her expression flickers. Annoyance? Fatigue? You can't tell. The muscles around her mouth tremble, like a memory trying to surface. She smooths it away before anyone notices. Her husband will see this portrait and pronounce it becoming. The church will call it chaste. The people will say she looks noble, but you, standing here centuries later, see something else, a woman who's been reduced to the outline of an idea. You move closer, tracing the edge of the painted jaw with your eyes. The brushwork is exquisite, soft glazes, translucent tones, but the emotion is gone, scraped clean. And then, in a single moment of eerie clarity, you realize how modern it all feels. The expectation hasn't vanished, it's just updated its vocabulary. Poised. Professional. Approachable, but not too friendly. The same script, rewritten for cameras instead of canvases. Back in the 17th century, though, the risk was greater. A misinterpreted portrait could cost not just reputation, but blood. Painters were exiled for flattery that bordered on seduction. Queens were accused of vanity for daring to look too content. The records mention one artist, his name lost, who tried to paint a foreign princess smiling with kindness. The painting never left the studio. It was destroyed by order of the council. The reason given: Her Majesty must not appear amused by the world. That phrase lingers in your mind. Amused by the world? You glance around at the walls, rows of faces that never knew laughter, and can't help but think, what a dull world it must have been. And yet, you sense rebellion brewing underneath. The painter's hand trembles for a reason. The women's eyes seem a shade too alive. Even here, among the strictest rules of appearance, something human keeps trying to break through. Maybe that's what art really is, an endless argument between what power demands and what truth insists on showing. As the painter steps back, the Queen's portrait stares out at you. You can't read her, and maybe that's the point. The smile is gone, but the defiance remains. Hidden, subtle, patient. Waiting for a century that will finally let her exhale. You wake in another room, colder this time, though the candles still flicker and the air still smells faintly of iron and perfume. The portrait studio has changed hands, passed down through generations. The walls are lined with jars of pigment, vermilion, azurite, ground pearl, crushed lapis lazuli. Each jar is a promise, colour that can outlive the flesh. The painter who stands before you now looks exhausted, his hands stained red from pigment and restless from repetition. He's painted hundreds of royal faces, each one a variation on the same theme. Pale, poised, unchanging. But as he dips his brush, he sighs softly and mutters to himself, "How many saints can a man paint before he loses faith in heaven?" His subject today is another duchess, but you can tell the centuries have changed something. The hairstyles are taller now, powdered and perfumed, like miniature marble towers. The dresses are absurd, hoops so wide you could set a tea table under them. And yet, despite all that grandeur, the faces have grown strangely fragile. This is the age of vanishing youth, and the women of the court are desperate to outrun time. You glance at the Duchess, her eyes gleam like polished glass, but her skin, her poor skin, tells another story. Beneath the snow-white powder, it's thin, dry, bruised with fatigue. She's not old exactly, just poisoned by fashion. The obsession with youth has reached its most dangerous peak. Every morning she bathes her face in rosewater and spirits of wine, then applies a paste of white lead and mercury. The powder hides everything, lines, blemishes, even personality. When the painter begins, she barely looks human. She's a ghost wearing silk. "Make me young," she says quietly, her accent clipped and aristocratic. "You can smooth the lines, can't you?" He hesitates. Every painter is also a diplomat. He knows that too much honesty can end his career. "Of course, my lady," he says, though his voice trembles slightly. As he paints, you can see what he's doing, erasing reality in favor of myth. The bags under her eyes become soft shadows. Her lips, once thin and cracked, bloom with artificial color. By the time he's finished, she's been reborn in pigment. She leans forward to see. Her face in the painting looks 20 years younger, serene and untroubled. She nods, satisfied, but you can tell that satisfaction isn't joy, it's fear disguised as relief. Because here's the quiet truth of the 18th century. Aging was treason against beauty, and beauty was duty. To remain forever youthful was to prove divine favor, a kind of visual immortality. And for royal women, immortality wasn't vanity, it was policy. Historians still argue whether this fixation began with Elizabeth I and her endless masks of lead, or with the French court's cult of artificial perfection. Either way, by now the mask has become inseparable from the person beneath it. Every wrinkle is an act of rebellion, every smile line a reminder of mortality. And so they erase them, chemically, cosmetically, emotionally. You step closer to the Duchess and notice how she holds her mouth, lips pressed gently together, afraid to let them move too much. The lead on her skin cracks easily. Smiling too often leaves permanent fissures. She's learned to avoid it, even in private. There's a legend about a countess who smiled too broadly at a royal ball. The next morning, her cheeks split open beneath the powder, the skin raw and weeping. She spent weeks recovering, not from the wound, but from the humiliation. Since then, no woman of rank dares to show teeth. It's strange how suffering became elegance. The painter continues to work, adding details to her pearls, her lace collar, the glitter of light on satin. But there's no warmth in the portrait, just perfection. He's painting not a woman, but a wish. Unaging beauty, eternal stillness. You glance around his studio. Other canvases lean against the walls, faces identical in their serenity. Every one of them looks both alive and embalmed. He must sense your unease because he suddenly murmurs, "They ask me for beauty, but they do not want life. They want marble that breathes." Outside, the sound of carriage wheels rattles on cobblestones. The world beyond this room is noisy, dirty, human. But inside, the illusion of divine control endures. The Duchess stands, powder drifting from her gown like dust from a tomb. "Send it to the palace," she says. "They'll want the younger version." When she leaves, the painter exhales as if he's been holding his breath for hours. He looks down at his hands, stained white from the pigment, and whispers, "The youth I paint lives longer than mine." You linger by the finished portrait. Up close, the beauty is breathtaking, but something in it feels wrong. The eyes shine too brightly, the skin too smooth. It's as if the woman in the frame has been embalmed alive, trapped between vanity and immortality. And maybe she has, because the more the aristocracy feared age, the less they allowed themselves to live. That fear didn't end with their makeup. It seeped into their gestures, their expressions, their very muscles. To smile was to risk revealing the cracks in the facade, literal or metaphorical. You think of it as a kind of silent contagion, the terror of being seen as human. And that terror became generational. Mothers taught it to daughters, painters taught it to apprentices, until an entire society learned how to hide emotion in plain sight. The irony? The lead and mercury they used to preserve youth actually accelerated aging. It scarred their skin, blackened their teeth, weakened their bones. In trying to appear eternal, they destroyed themselves. But no one said a word. Even now, the painting still glows faintly under the candlelight. The Duchess's calm, powder-white face stares out at you, forever frozen in the moment she asked to be made young. And behind the varnish, beneath the pigments and lead, something invisible pulses, the faint trace of a heartbeat that once knew how to smile. It beats slower now, buried under centuries of silence, and you can't help wondering, what would she look like if she'd just let herself age? If she'd laughed, lines and all? Maybe then she would have vanished from the walls, but not from life. A draught of cold air drifts through the palace hall, carrying the faint scent of candle wax and medicine. You turn toward the noise of footsteps, the soft shuffle of servants moving slowly, reverently, through a room filled with drawn curtains and low whispers. It feels less like a royal residence tonight and more like a hospital. A woman sits near the window, her face half in shadow. You recognize her immediately, though her portraits never looked like this. Elizabeth, or Catherine, or Maria, depending on which century you've landed in this time. They all blur together here, these women with crowns and fragile lungs. The candlelight flickers across her skin, and you see it clearly now, the telltale pockmarks, faint but impossible to hide. Smallpox. the disease that erased not just lives but smiles. In the 17th and 18th centuries, smallpox swept through royal houses like a curse, leaving scars in its wake. It spared few and disfigured many. And in an era obsessed with appearances, beauty wasn't just vanity, it was currency, diplomacy, divine proof. One outbreak could destroy a dynasty's image. You approach quietly, trying not to startle her. She's reading a letter, the ink smudged, where her trembling hand has touched it. It's from her portraitist, assuring her that he'll paint her gently without cruelty. That phrase catches you. Without cruelty. You realize what he means. He'll erase the scars. He'll smooth her skin, restore the illusion of perfection. He will lie for her, because the truth is unthinkable. A queen with pockmarks, a duchess with discoloured cheeks. And yet the illness was everywhere. Even those who survived it bore its signature, often across the very place they could least hide it, the face. Historians still argue whether smallpox changed portraiture itself. Some claim it forced painters to idealize their subjects even more, to compensate for the damage reality had done. Others say it humanized them, that for the first time a few artists dared to capture vulnerability in paint. Either way, the infection left its mark. You think of Queen Mary II, who died of smallpox at just 32, of Lady Mary Wortley Montagu, who survived but was left scarred, and who would later risk her life to introduce smallpox inoculation to England. You think of the countless unnamed attendants, courtiers and children who vanished from portraits replaced by fresher faces. But what strikes you most is how illness shaped emotion itself. Once the disease spread, smiling became both impossible and inappropriate. The pain made facial movement excruciating, the scarring made self-consciousness unbearable. Imagine being immortalized in oil paint after your face had been rewritten by infection. Would you smile? You look back at the woman by the window. Her expression is neutral, but her eyes burn with defiance. She hasn't looked in a mirror for weeks, perhaps months. The court avoids mentioning her face at all. When the painter arrives, he sets up his easel in silence, careful not to meet her gaze. She asks, "Will you paint me as I am?" He hesitates, just long enough for her to know the answer. "No, Majesty, I will paint you as you were." A strange, thin smile flickers at the corners of her mouth. Not joy, not mockery, just resignation. It's the first time you've seen a royal smile in days, and it hurts to look at. The brush glides across the canvas. He works delicately, inventing a memory that never quite existed. The scars vanish under translucent layers of flesh-toned glaze. The hollow beneath her cheek becomes softness. The discoloration becomes light. When he finishes, she looks flawless again, timeless, beautiful, and completely unrecognizable. "Thank you," she says softly, though you can't tell whether she means it. Because even as she gazes at her restored reflection, she knows what's missing, the truth of survival. The painting shows a woman untouched by disease, but it erases the fact that she endured it. You step closer to the window. Outside, the courtyard glimmers with frost. The servants hang black crepe along the corridors. Someone else has died tonight. The painter quietly packs his brushes. Before he leaves, he glances once more at his work, then at her real face. He bows, but not out of duty, out of sorrow. She sits for a long time after he's gone, staring at both reflections, her own in the glass and the invented one on the canvas. One shows truth, fragile and mortal. The other shows perfection, lifeless and eternal. And suddenly you realize her expression in both is the same, calm, still, emotionless, because when beauty becomes survival, stillness becomes armor. There's a quiet detail historians often overlook. After smallpox epidemics, the use of heavy powder and rouge in royal courts skyrocketed. It wasn't fashion, it was camouflage. The whiteness, the stillness, the aversion to smiling, all of it was part of hiding the scars. But beneath those masks walked women who had lived through plagues, quarantines, and loss unimaginable. You wonder how many of them were forbidden to show that grief, how many were told to compose themselves for the sake of the realm. How many wanted to weep and laugh at their own survival, but instead practiced serenity before a mirror. You turn back toward the portrait. It gleams faintly, a perfect lie suspended in paint. Yet if you look long enough, you can almost see her true face flickering underneath. Scarred, strong, real. And in that hidden layer, maybe she's smiling after all. Not the courtly smile of diplomacy, but the private, weary smile of a woman who's lived. The candles flicker low as you walk down a narrow gallery lined with gold frames. These portraits feel different, more cautious, more self-conscious. You lean closer and notice that none of these royal mouths are open, not even slightly. Some look as if they've been sealed shut. You glance at a small plaque beside one and read the date aloud. 1724. Ah, the century of smiles and of terrible dentistry. You step through an arched doorway into a dressing chamber that smells faintly of honey and clove oil. The Queen sits at her vanity, not with a painter, but a surgeon dentist. He wears an apron that once might have been white. On the table before him lies an assortment of tools, pliers, ivory picks, a small hammer. They glint in the light like torture instruments. She grimaces, not from pain, but from dread. "Just one more tooth?" she asks. The dentist bows, hesitant. "Your Majesty, this one cannot be saved." He works quickly. She doesn't flinch. Centuries of etiquette have made her face a fortress. When it's done, he presses a handkerchief to her mouth. A tiny red bloom spreads through the cloth. You look away. When she finally opens her mouth again, her voice sounds faint and thick. "Can you replace it?" "Of course, ma'am," he says. "Hippo ivory or perhaps human teeth, if you prefer the natural look." She nods weakly. The dentures will hurt, they always do, but she'll wear them anyway. And suddenly you understand another reason royal women never smiled. They couldn't afford to. By the 1700s, sugar had swept across Europe like a glittering epidemic. Desserts, wines, candied fruits, the aristocracy gorged on sweetness, unaware that it was slowly rotting them from within. Even the healthiest mouths collapsed under the onslaught. The result? Blackened stumps where pearls once were. Historians still argue whether Queen Elizabeth I had truly lost most of her teeth to decay, but contemporary accounts certainly suggest it. Courtiers wrote that her speech became indistinct. Others mentioned her avoidance of laughter in public. One ambassador noted she smiled rarely, perhaps for prudence, perhaps for want of teeth. You wince. The phrase feels cruel and intimate at once. Royal portraiture adapted accordingly. Painters began closing their subjects' mouths entirely, sometimes painting over earlier sketches where lips had been parted. A smile now risked exposing not charm, but ruin. It's hard to project divine authority when your breath smells of decay. You study one of the portraits nearby. The Queen's lips are perfectly pressed, the corners softened with carmine. Her skin glows, but her mouth is a sealed envelope. The effect is strangely elegant and profoundly sad. It's a kind of enforced silence that goes deeper than etiquette. You imagine how that must have felt in private moments, how laughter at court became a dangerous luxury, how even joy itself had to be performed behind a fan. And yet, beneath the embarrassment, there's something almost tragic about their desperation to appear flawless. The same women who ruled continents couldn't rule their own bodies. To hide the damage, they powdered more, painted more, and ate less. Some resorted to keeping their mouths barely ajar when speaking to disguise missing teeth. Others perfected the royal murmur, a low, careful tone that required minimal movement of the lips. By the time photography arrived a century later, that habit had already become instinct. You step closer to another canvas, a late portrait of Catherine the Great. Her smile is imperceptible, but her eyes sparkle with mischief. You can sense that she's aware of the absurdity of it all. She once wrote in a letter that she envied peasants their ability to laugh freely without worrying how they looked. "My mouth," she said, "is my throne's prisoner." The irony hits you like a gust of cold air. For royal women, the mouth, once the instrument of laughter, taste, speech, had become the site of shame. Decay and dentistry turned smiles into hazards, and the solutions were horrifying. Ivory dentures cracked easily, wooden ones swelled with moisture. Human teeth, sometimes stolen from corpses, smelled foul and loosened within weeks. A single meal could dislodge them. Some queens kept extra sets hidden in velvet boxes just in case. No wonder portraitists avoided the risk. Better a serene, closed expression than a grotesque accident immortalized in oil. There's a fringe account, a diary entry from a court attendant, that describes one disastrous sitting in which a duchess's false tooth fell out mid-pose. The painter fainted. She laughed once, briefly, then ordered the canvas burned. After that she never smiled again. You exhale slowly, letting the absurdities settle. It's both tragic and darkly comic, the way vanity and survival intertwined. In this light, the painted calm of royal women isn't just emotional restraint, it's physical necessity. Their very bodies had betrayed them, and all they could do was pretend otherwise. You run your hand along the edge of one frame, feeling the dust of centuries. Each portrait here is a negotiation between reality and reputation, pain and poise. There's one last image at the end of the gallery. An older queen, her face half in shadow, her lips faintly parted. Her artist dared something rare, a glimpse of vulnerability. Her teeth aren't visible, but her expression feels real, weary, almost tender. It's not quite a smile, it's something braver, honesty. The plaque beneath her reads simply, "After illness, 1792. You stand there for a long time, watching her. For the first time in this endless gallery of perfect faces, you sense relief. She doesn't look divine, she just looks human. And somehow, that feels like rebellion enough. The palace corridors are quiet again. Not the tranquil kind of quiet, but the suffocating kind that makes you aware of your own breath. The candlelight trembles against carved walls and portraits that stare without blinking. You turn a corner and step into the royal drawing room, where etiquette is queen and emotion is treason. It's early evening, the air smells of lavender water and starch. Ladies in waiting glide like ghosts, arranging fans and ribbons and lace with military precision. You hear the faint sound of a court musician rehearsing, a slow, polite melody meant to fill the silence but not disturb it. And there she is, the new duchess, barely 20. Perfect posture, perfect gown, and a face that could launch 1,000 curtsies. She's sitting by the window, her expression frozen, somewhere between attentiveness and boredom. A young attendant leans toward her, whispering, "Her Majesty will be arriving shortly. Remember the rules." The Duchess nods. "Of course." But her fingers tighten slightly on the edge of her fan. You watch her rehearse her face in the reflection of a silver tea tray, eyes calm, mouth composed, no movement, no emotion. This isn't vanity, it's survival. At court, even a smile could be dangerous, not because of decay or lead powder this time, but because of interpretation. Historians call this the age of masking. Every gesture, every glance was loaded with meaning. To smile openly at one man might imply affection, at another, alliance, at none, pride. A smile in this room was a weapon or an invitation, and a woman with power wasn't allowed to wield either. The Duchess knows this. She's been trained for it since childhood. Her tutor drilled the rules into her like scripture. A lady's mouth must never speak faster than her mind. A closed mouth cannot be misquoted. A smile is a door, keep it shut. And so she learned to hide her emotions behind lace, and lace behind silence. The courtiers enter one by one, bowing and murmuring polite nothingness. Their wigs smell faintly of wax and envy. The Duchess rises to greet them, lowering her eyes just enough to suggest humility. No smile. The conversation begins. Shallow, but precise. The weather, the gardens, the French ambassador's new horse. No one says what they mean, no one means what they say. She listens carefully, tilting her head, nodding at the right moments. She has mastered the art of polite invisibility, and yet you can feel her boredom humming beneath the surface. At one point, a clumsy young noble drops his goblet, spilling wine onto the carpet. The room gasps. He stammers an apology. The Duchess, almost reflexively, smiles. Just a small, human thing, a sympathetic smile. It lasts maybe a second, and the silence that follows could slice glass. Every head turns, every fan freezes mid-wave. The Queen's chief lady raises an eyebrow so high it nearly disappears into her powdered wig. The Duchess realizes her mistake, too late. She lowers her gaze, lips pressed tight again, pretending it never happened. But the damage is done. You can feel it ripple through the room like cold water. Later, you overhear the whispers. "Did you see it?" She smiled. At him. Too forward. Too French. Too familiar. By morning, the rumour has grown claws. The Duchess is suddenly flirtatious, improper, uncontrolled. A single twitch of the mouth has rewritten her reputation. You follow her into her chambers that night. She sits at her vanity, staring at herself in the mirror, repeating under her breath, "It was nothing. It was nothing." Her maid hovers silently, afraid to speak. It's a strange moment. Quiet, heartbreaking, almost absurd. You realize that the rule against smiling wasn't really about beauty or holiness anymore. It was about containment. A woman who smiled at the wrong time threatened the fragile structure of hierarchy, of who could feel what and when. Historians still debate how much control royal women truly had over their images. Some say they were victims of propaganda, others insist they were its masters. But standing here, watching the Duchess stare into her reflection as if she's seeing a stranger, you know the truth is more complicated. She's both captive and accomplice, trapped in the machinery of appearances, but skilled enough to operate it. Her mask isn't just a prison, it's a tool. Tomorrow she'll wake early, put on her powdered armour, and face the court again. The gossip will swirl, but she'll outlast it. She always does. Her silence will strangle the rumours before they reach the Queen's ears. And one day they'll call her graceful, unflappable, serene, all because she learned how to turn the absence of emotion into an art form. But tonight, when the candles burn low and the servants leave her alone, she lets herself breathe. The muscles of her face twitch, relax, twitch again, like a bird learning to fly after years in a cage. You watch as she tries, tentatively, to smile again. Not for anyone else, just to see if she remembers how. The movement feels foreign, fragile, painful, but it's there. And for the first time all evening, she looks alive. Then she catches her own reflection, and the smile fades. You almost wish the painter could see her like this, not composed, not divine, just human. But of course that would never do. In the gallery tomorrow she'll be all restraint again. Another flawless face in a line of women who learned too well that freedom of expression was the one thing royalty couldn't afford. And the portraits will hang forever, serene and silent, concealing not just emotion, but generations of fear. Because behind every motionless royal face lies the same unspoken command, passed down like a curse: be still, be perfect, be unreadable. And beneath it, softer, almost lost beneath the centuries, another voice whispers from the depths of the mirror, but don't forget, you were born to smile. The morning light bleeds into a painter's studio in the French court. Pale, powdery, slow. You find yourself watching from a corner as an artist adjusts his palette, the air dense with the smell of oil and dust and expensive perfume. The room is quiet except for the faint crackle of the fire and the rustle of silk. His subject today is the Queen herself. She sits beneath a tapestry, her dress spilling over the edge of the chair like a frozen wave. The light hits her face perfectly, softening every shadow, every trace of fatigue. And yet, her expression is so still it almost feels carved. She's tired, you can see that immediately, but she hides it well. The painter clears his throat. "Majesty," he says gently, "might I suggest a touch of warmth in the expression?" Her gaze stops him mid-sentence. He lowers his eyes at once. "Forgive me." The silence stretches thick as syrup. The attendants shift uneasily, pretending to dust things that don't need dusting. You can feel the tension in the air. That fragile balance between flattery and fear. Because the painter isn't just painting her. He's painting how the world will remember her. And if he gets it wrong, if she looks too soft, too stern, too alive, that memory could become a scandal. He works carefully, his brush hovering just above the canvas. Every stroke is a negotiation between honesty and survival. He glances up again at her face. Her lips are closed, her eyes half-lidded. She's performing the one skill she's mastered to perfection, controlled invisibility. But beneath the veneer of calm, you can see the truth. She's exhausted. Exhausted from the rituals, from the ceremonies, from being watched every hour of every day. Exhausted from having her image, her body, her very face treated as property of the crown. She's been told all her life that her stillness equals dignity, that emotion is unbecoming, that laughter belongs to commoners, that a smile could undo an empire. But now, as she sits here for yet another portrait, something in her expression trembles almost imperceptibly. It's not defiance, not yet. It's something smaller, weariness so deep it borders on rebellion. Historians still argue about how much of this truth the painter's allowed to slip through. Some believe artists like Elisabeth Vigée-Lebrun, one of the rare women to paint royalty, tried to smuggle real emotion into the frame. A twitch of the mouth here, a softness in the gaze there. It was dangerous, subtle work. You can almost imagine Vigée-Lebrun's whispered promise to her sitters, "Don't worry, I'll make you look like yourself." And for a brief, shining moment, she did. There's a story about one of her early sittings with Marie Antoinette. The young queen, barely 20, arrived in full regalia, powdered, perfumed, armoured in etiquette. But as they talked, she began to relax. She laughed once, quietly, then too loudly. The attendants gasped. Vigée-Lebrun, without missing a beat, said, "Majesty, that's the expression I've been waiting for." The queen froze, startled, then smiled again. That portrait, Marie Antoinette with a rose, became famous not for its grandeur, but for its humanity. She looked for the first time alive, warm, gentle, real. and the public despised it. Pamphleteers mocked the painting as unfitting, immodest, bourgeois. Critics accused the Queen of playing at being a shepherdess while France starved. A smile that had been natural in the studio became scandalous in the world outside. You can almost hear the echo of her confusion. I was only being kind. That, more than any political pamphlet, taught her the true peril of appearing human. So the next time she sat for a portrait, her expression was different. Not cold, but careful. Not dead, but defended. By the end of her reign, her portraits had returned to the old tradition. Serenity carved from stillness. You stand there watching, and for a moment you pity the painter. No matter what he does, he'll be wrong. Too much life and he's reckless, too little and he's cruel. The Queen, sensing his hesitation, says quietly, "You may paint what you wish. It makes no difference." He looks up, surprised. She's not being modest, she's being honest. Her image no longer belongs to her. It belongs to politics, to propaganda, to the gaze of history. He paints her eyes softer this time, as if he's trying to return a piece of her humanity. And maybe, just maybe, he succeeds, because when he's finished and the attendants finally leave, the Queen approaches the canvas. She stares at her reflection in paint, the ghostly version of herself. Perfect, pale, immortal. Then she laughs once, very softly. It's not a happy laugh. It's the kind of laugh you make when you realize you're trapped in something so absurd that crying would be pointless. You can hear her whisper under her breath, almost to herself, "If only I'd known that my stillness would outlive me." And she's right. Centuries later, her calm face will hang in museums, her painted poise mistaken for vanity, her silence for arrogance. Few will guess that behind that serenity was simply exhaustion, a woman painted to death before she even died. You step closer to the portrait. The details blur under the varnish, the lace, the pearls, the perfect skin. But there, at the edge of her mouth, you think you see it. Not a smile exactly, but the ghost of one. A human trace, fragile and defiant. Perhaps the painter left it there on purpose. A secret between two people who understood what it meant to be seen and not known. And when you step back, that faint warmth in her face feels almost like a whisper across time. They took everything. My words, my breath, my laughter. But not this. You linger a moment longer, then leave the room. Behind you, the Queen's smile, or whatever it is, glows softly in the dark, like a candle refusing to die. You step out of a heavy oak doorway and land, almost by contrast, in a room that smells of powder and orange blossom. The French court greets you like a warm bath, laughter muffled by fans, silk whispering against skin, a gilt mirror that reflects everything flattering and nothing true. Here, smiles are practiced like a dance step, suggestive, sly, almost perfumed. Across the channel, though, the English courts feel like winter, severe light, clipped speech, faces arranged like icicles. Tonight you sit between those two worlds. In Versailles, painters and courtiers conspire to make a woman look soft without making her soft. The French aesthetic favours curve over cliff, suggestion over seal. Faces here are taught to flirt at the edges, eyes that smoulder but do not burn, lips that hint at mirth and immediately apologize for having done so. A duchess might tilt her head toward a friend, and the painter will catch that tiny curve, then turn it into a lesson in elegance. It's a smile that winks with etiquette, half invite, half contract. You almost expect a powdered footman to hand out tiny napkins labelled for demurrals only. Meanwhile, in Tudor England and later under Victorian rule, dignity reads like a weather report, overcast with a chance of scorn. Portraits are composed to freeze the jawline like a promise. Smiles are not merely discouraged, they are treated as political liabilities. In a Tudor court, you could almost time the seasons by the stiffness of the collars. In a Victorian salon, the expression of cheerful reserve ruled the day. Cheerful enough to be human, reserved enough not to threaten anyone's inheritance. The difference comes down to what each court wanted to advertise. The French wanted sensual power, charm as soft coercion. Louis XIV's courtiers learned to use charm like armour, at once seductive and strategically harmless. The English preferred moral authority, stoicism, solidity, the unbending face of duty. One court courted admirers, the other demanded obedience. So painters in Paris learned to coax a laugh out of a sitter's eyeball, while English portraitists mastered the art of dignified boredom. Want to look like you could lead an army and also gossip at tea time? Go French. Want to look like your family fortune was carved from granite? Go English. You notice subtleties. The French painter places a fingertip near the mouth, a prop that suggests intimacy without saying anything. The hand is a mediator of expression. A small, deliberate looseness of the jaw implies self-possession. The English painter places a hand on a ledger or a globe, objects that straighten emotions into statistics. The props are punctuation. An embroidered slipper says play, a ledger says lineage. Historians still argue whether cultural differences in portraiture came from climate, religion, or simple institutional vanity. Some insist the romantic Gallic temperament produced warmer canvases. Others point to different court rituals and legal structures that made English decorum more rigid. Either way, the effect is literal. You can feel the temperature change as you move from one painted room to the next. Here's a mainstream fact to anchor you. In the 17th and 18th centuries, French royal portraiture, especially under the influence of artists like François Boucher and later Alexandre François Desportes, favoured softer brushwork and lighter palettes that made skin look luminous and critically inviting. English portraiture, by contrast, often emphasised linearity and sober colouring. That isn't merely aesthetic, it's political branding. A soft palette sells intimacy, a sober palette sells authority. And then there's the quirky stuff. A fringe rumour, often laughed about in art circles, claims that some French ladies kept tiny scented sachets stitched inside their collars which contained powdered lavender and ground bezoar, a supposed antidote to bad luck, for the specific purpose of ensuring their smiles smelled appropriately, courtly. Whether that's true or merely a glamorous urban legend, the notion itself tells you something. In France, even the smell of a smile was curated. You laugh at the idea of a bezoar in your neckline, then picture a duchess tucking it in and realize the performance extended even into the microscopic. You can hear the jokes in the room if you listen. The French court's motto might as well have been, "Always smile, but only on the left," because rotating slightly left made your nose look smaller in candlelight. And the English might have had their own rule: smile only with your eyes, teeth are for beasts and treaties. You chuckle because the truth is stranger than the quips. The mechanics of these differences are practical too. French painters often used looser glazing and the sfumato technique, soft transitions between light and shadow, to create that pearly, half-laughing look. The brushstrokes blur the edges of emotion, creating a sense of movement. English artists, trained in line and form, emphasized contours and crisp shadows, which makes any hint of movement, like a smile, fall awkwardly and look like an error rather than an intention. It's the difference between a whispered aside and a posted manifesto. Imagine a royal portrait exchange between courts. A French ambassador sends a likeness with a subtle upturn of the mouth. English courtiers interpret it as coyness or conspiracy. The rumour mill churns. Marriage contracts are renegotiated on the basis of eyebrow placement. We've already seen how a single expression could derail alliances. Here you have two national styles interpreting the same gesture in ways that inflame or soothe diplomatic tensions. But culture is not a monolith. The French court's permissive flirtation didn't mean women had full freedom. It meant they learned to weaponize warmth. A well-timed smile could win favors, secure marriages, and lubricate negotiations. The ability to appear warm without being vulnerable was itself a skill honed by necessity, like learning to dance on thin ice in silk slippers. The English court's coolness didn't mean emotional sterility, it was a shield. To look impenetrable kept questions at bay and rivals grounded. You find yourself grinning an illicit private grin because both schools of portraiture secretly admired what the other forbade. French painters envied the solidity of English poise. English patrons envied the liveliness of Parisian charm. It's a human thing. We want what we see as paradoxically absent in ourselves. Here's a slightly darker joke that lands because it's true. The French portraitist gave you a flirtatious eyebrow. The English painter gave you a will. One sells allure, the other sells inheritance paperwork, and both cost a fortune. And let's not forget the role of fashion and cosmetics in shaping these national faces. French salons popularized lighter, pearly skin achieved by layers of cerise and rouge. These substances, as you've already seen, came with health costs but looked exquisite in candlelight. English women, more practical in some courts and more austere in others, often favoured less deadly cosmetics and relied more on structure, boned corsets, ruffs and collars, to create a portrait's geometry. The face had to work with the costume. French faces joked, English faces declared. You wander through the painted galleries, imagining how this played out in real life. A French princess might flirt with a Spanish envoy with a look that conveyed private joke and public diplomacy at once. An English countess might meet the same envoy with a flat smile and a ledger, pleasing him with duty rather than delight. Each approach had its rewards and its perils. Historians still argue whether the warming trend in French portraiture actually helped produce more female autonomy at court, or whether it simply trained women to be better performers of an older patriarchy. Some scholars suggest that smiling, used strategically, allowed women to navigate power in softer, less confrontational ways. Others think it merely added a layer of courtly deceit. Both interpretations make sense, and both miss the point that for the women involved, these were survival strategies, not philosophy. By the end of your stroll, the air outside the gallery has cooled. You step from a room that smells faintly of bergamot into one that feels like a baked apple left in a cold cellar. The portraits don't shout at you, they insinuate. They teach you that expression is less about feeling and more about message. You grin again, this time fully aware of the absurdity. You, an intruder through centuries, have been schooled in the etiquette of not smiling, then briefly conditioned in how to misapply a smile for court advantage. Maybe that's why modern royals still rehearse smilings for cameras. The lineage of practice is long, and the training is stubborn. One final light joke before you go. If you want to blend in at a French court, practice half laughs in the mirror. If you want to blend in at a Victorian drawing room, practice your ledger face. Either way, bring a handkerchief. The powder gets everywhere. You wake now in a colder room, quieter, lonelier. The laughter of Versailles is gone, the silk and powdered mischief replaced by the stillness of a single chair, an extinguished candle, and a woman staring at her own reflection in the darkened glass of a window. She could be anyone. A queen, a duchess, a forgotten lady whose title mattered more than her name. But tonight she isn't performing. Her hands are bare of jewels, her hair unpinned. Her reflection looks back at her like a stranger. The paintings will remember her as serene, perfect, invulnerable. But here, in the candle's fading glow, you see the truth. She looks heartbreakingly tired, because behind every unsmiling royal portrait lies a quiet tragedy, the cost of suppression. Imagine what it means to live an entire life performing serenity. Day after day, year after year, every expression monitored, every breath weighed against reputation. You begin to wonder where the person ends and the performance begins. She reaches for the mirror, fingertips brushing the cool glass. The woman who looks back doesn't smile, doesn't speak. She just exists, painted alive but living as if painted. There are letters, of course, that historians love to quote. Small, fragile glimpses into the inner world beneath that frozen calm. Letters from queens who couldn't confess to sadness in public, so they confessed it in ink. Catherine of Braganza, the Portuguese queen, married to Charles II, once wrote that her role was to be agreeable, not to be seen to feel. Marie Antoinette complained of a loneliness so great that laughter itself feels foreign. And Empress Elizabeth of Austria, Sisi, described her portrait sittings as hours spent becoming someone who is already gone. Each line feels like a sigh pressed between the pages of history. You imagine the rituals that fill her day. Morning prayers, afternoon audiences, rehearsed pleasantries over tea. Always the same neutral expression. Soft enough to seem kind, stiff enough to seem controlled. But at night, when the courtiers retreat and the candles dim, the quiet must be unbearable. You picture her alone at her writing desk, the smell of ink and old paper thick in the air. She might start a letter she'll never send, or whisper a few words into the silence just to hear her own voice again. Do they even know what I sound like when I laugh? She wonders. Historians still argue whether royal women truly felt trapped, or if they simply adapted. Some scholars describe them as master strategists, women who turned stillness into power, who understood that silence could command attention louder than words. Others see them as victims of a system that demanded their self-erasure. But here, in this moment, it's clear that both can be true. Stillness can be strength, and it can be loneliness. She moves to the dressing table and lights a single candle. Its small flame wavers, illuminating the powder and brushes scattered across the surface. You recognize the same poisons from before: lead paste, mercury tint, all the alchemy of beauty and control. She touches the rim of one jar thoughtfully, then wipes her finger on her sleeve, leaving a faint white smear. "I wonder," she murmurs, "what my face would look like without all this." Her maid, half asleep in the corner, doesn't answer. She wouldn't dare. And you realize the saddest part. This woman hasn't seen her true face in years, only the painted version in the mirror, the one sculpted by fear and ritual and powder. There's a certain dignity in her restraint, but also an ache, because the very composure that keeps her safe also keeps her invisible. Every portrait that captures her calm becomes another layer of silence, another record of how beautifully she learned not to exist. You glance toward the walls where unfinished canvases lean in the shadows. They all look the same, women serene, immaculate, and distant. The painter has learned his craft too well. But then in the corner you notice one smaller sketch, rough, half-finished, probably abandoned. It's of her, unmistakably, but her face is softer, more alive. The corners of her mouth are lifted just enough to suggest that maybe just once she smiled. It's the only version of her that looks real. You wonder if the painter kept it as a secret act of mercy, or if she demanded it destroyed and he disobeyed. Either way, it survived. That's the thing about silence. It's never total. It leaves echoes in unexpected places, in sketches, letters, diaries, the faint smile hidden beneath varnish. And here, standing in the dim room, you realize something important. The stillness wasn't just a mask, it was a survival mechanism. In a world where a woman's every movement could be weaponized against her, calm became armor, composure was control, stillness was power, power so absolute it could look like surrender. The tragedy is that the world never learned to tell the difference. She blows out the candle, the smoke spirals upward, thin and fragrant. Her reflection disappears into darkness, leaving only the faint gleam of the mirror's edge. A border between two selves, one public, one lost. And you can't help but think of all the royal women who did the same, who spent their lives curating an image that was never truly theirs, until one day the image outlived them. Tomorrow she'll wake up and do it again. She'll let the painter smooth her skin into perfection. The priests call her serene, the courtiers whisper their admiration. And her face, calm, eternal, unreadable, will be sent out into the world like a message written in silence, a message that says, I endured, but tonight, in this tiny, private moment that history will never record, she touches the corner of her mouth and lets it lift, just barely. A smile, not for diplomacy, not for duty, just for herself. And it's the most powerful thing you've seen yet. The room tilts and shifts again like you've stepped between brush strokes. You're no longer in her chamber, but in a dim, echoing gallery. A corridor of portraits hung in gold frames from floor to ceiling. All of them are watching you, hundreds of eyes, hundreds of mouths closed in perfect restraint. Some look patient, others look as though they're about to speak, but never will. The silence is so thick you can almost hear it breathing. You walk slowly, trailing your fingertips along the gilt frames. The paint seems to hum under your touch, whispering the stories you already half know. Women who hid their emotions not because they lacked them, but because expression itself was a liability. You recognize them by posture, the tilt of a chin, the still hands folded over silk skirts. Queens, consorts, duchesses and princesses, all immortalized in obedience. And then, at the far end of the corridor, one painting stops you cold. The plaque reads Anne Boleyn. She stands tall in a black gown trimmed with seed pearls, the famous bee necklace resting against her throat. Her face is luminous in the darkness, her gaze sharp, her mouth unsmiling. Everyone knows that face. It's become shorthand for ambition, seduction, tragedy. But when you look closer, there's something else in the brushwork, something the official history never mentioned. Her mouth is not expressionless, it's defiant. She isn't serene, she's holding something back. Historians still argue whether Anne Boleyn smiled at her execution. Some swear she did, a small, ironic curve, as she looked toward the crowd. Others insist it was no smile at all, merely the trembling of fear. But that question, did she smile, has followed her ghost through 5 centuries, because if she did, that single act would have been the ultimate rebellion. A queen stripped of title, accused of adultery and treason, standing before death, smiling anyway, it would have terrified every man who ever claimed to control her. And it would have rewritten what power looked like. You imagine it now, the morning of May 19th, 1536, the courtyard of the Tower of London shrouded in a thin mist. Anne walks out in a dark gown and a velvet cloak, her steps light despite the weight of history pressing against her shoulders. The crowd murmurs, uncertain whether to pity or despise her. She looks calm, almost radiant. I come not to accuse any man, she says, her voice steady. I die a good Christian woman. Then perhaps that flicker, so small it's almost a trick of the light, a half smile, wry and peaceful at once. The executioner later claimed she prayed softly, then knelt. Her final words were gracious, careful, but witnesses never agreed on her expression. Some saw serenity. Others swore she was amused by the absurdity of it all. That ambiguity, the smile that might have been, turned her into legend. Royal women had been silent before. Anne was the first to use silence as irony, and that scared the world. The painter who later immortalized her knew this. You can see it in the way he painted her mouth, that impossible balance between composure and mockery. A mouth that says, "You think you've won," while never quite opening. You step closer, imagining the painter's trembling hand as he worked. He couldn't be too bold. Her image was politically radioactive. Too soft, and she'd look innocent, an insult to the crown. Too harsh, and he'd seem loyal to her enemies. So he settled for ambiguity, the same expression that history still debates, serenity or defiance, grace or vengeance. That's the beauty of it. No one can tell. You move along the gallery. A few portraits later, you find another face, equally still, equally loaded, Marie Antoinette, painted shortly before her imprisonment. Her expression is calm, eerily calm, but knowing what's coming, that calm becomes unbearable. Two queens, separated by centuries, joined by the same paradox, condemned women who refused to give their captors the satisfaction of fear. Anne's silence was sharp, Marie's was soft. Both were revolutionary, because for royal women to smile at the wrong moment could destroy you, but to smile at the right one could take your enemies down with you. There's an account, recorded by a guard at the conciergerie, that claims Marie Antoinette smiled faintly when she tripped on the scaffold. "Pardon, monsieur," she said to the executioner who steadied her. "I did not mean to do it." The witnesses laughed nervously, half in admiration, half in horror. She had turned grace itself into defiance. Her smile, if it was one, became a weapon sharper than the blade. You stand between their portraits now, Anne's and Marie's, two faces separated by 250 years of history, but painted with the same expression, a mask that means everything and nothing. Both learned that in a world ruled by men, silence and stillness could be armor, but at the end it could also be a choice. When everything else had been taken, their crowns, their names, their safety, how they faced death was the one thing they could still own. And they chose composure. They chose the kind of poise that makes witnesses uncomfortable because it feels like a secret they'll never be told. A smile at the gallows is not joy, it's ownership. You wander on past more portraits, queens who lived, queens who fell, each one frozen in that royal paradox of grace and terror. But after Anne and Marie, something changes. Later, painters begin to let emotion seep back into their canvases, a hint of melancholy, a softness in the gaze. The stillness is still there, but it's no longer lifeless. It's haunted. Historians argue whether this shift marked the beginning of modernity in portraiture, when art finally started admitting that even queens could bleed, could think, could feel. But standing here among their ghosts, you suspect the change wasn't in the art. It was in the women. They had learned that stillness could be rebellion, that composure could speak louder than screams. Anne Boleyn's faint smirk and Marie Antoinette's calm apology weren't accidents. They were messages to history. You can silence me, but not my face. You step back from the paintings, the air cold and dry against your skin. Their eyes follow you as you turn away. And for the first time, the stillness doesn't feel like submission anymore. It feels like victory. Because 5 centuries later, people still argue about whether they smiled. And that means, in a way, they're still winning. You blink, and the gallery of royal ghosts fades around you. The hush of their stillness gives way to something livelier, a cluttered artist's workshop filled with paint-stained cloth, unfinished canvases, and a strange, restless hum in the air. You smell turpentine and wax, hear the scratch of a brush against wood, and realize this is where rebellion was born. Not on a battlefield, but behind an easel. You're watching a painter, young, unkempt, distracted. His hair is tied back with ribbon, his coat is speckled with colour, he's humming under his breath, painting not with reverence, but with affection. His subject sits across from him, a royal woman, yes, but not like the others. She looks at ease. Her posture isn't rigid, her lips aren't frozen. She's not performing divinity. She's simply there, in the moment, a little tired, a little amused. The painter notices the way the corner of her mouth trembles toward laughter. He doesn't suppress it, he chases it. His brush flicks and turns, softening the shadows, brightening her gaze. For the first time in centuries, the artist isn't afraid of the smile. This is new. Because by the late 18th century, portraiture had started to change. Artists began to question whether perfection was truly beautiful or just lifeless. They started slipping humanity back into the frame. You see it in the loosened brushstrokes of Thomas Gainsborough, in the light-hearted realism of Jean-Baptiste Greuze, in the quiet sympathy of Elisabeth Vigée-Lebrun. These painters were tired of marble masks. They wanted warmth, breath, imperfection, and sometimes they dared to hide rebellion inside that warmth. Historians still argue whether this softening was political or personal. Was it Enlightenment humanism creeping into art, or just fatigue with centuries of artifice? Either way, you can feel the shift. The portraits of royal women are no longer altarpieces, they're confessions. Take, for example, one of Vigée-Lebrun's most whispered-about paintings, Madame Grand. The sitter's expression is calm, almost shy, but the faint curve of her lips betrays something else, something playful, almost knowing. Critics at the time called it indecorous, a smile too private for a public portrait. You can almost hear Vigée-Lebrun's silent reply, "Yes, that's the point." That was the artist's rebellion, not through drama, but through tenderness. The tiniest act of truth painted in full daylight. You move through the studio as if drifting through a dream. On one wall hangs a series of sketches, unfinished studies for portraits that were never approved. A few show queens and duchesses mid-laughter, caught in moments that look scandalously ordinary, one brushing hair from her eyes, another talking, another caught mid-breath. They look alive. "These were never meant to be seen," the painter murmurs from behind his easel. You realize he's aware of you, though you shouldn't exist in his world. Too much life for the frame. He turns back to his work. "But I keep them. For balance." You glance at the canvas before him. The woman in the painting is halfway between centuries, 1 foot in duty, 1 in freedom. Her face carries the discipline of her ancestors, but her eyes have softened as if she knows a secret they didn't, that power and humanity might not be enemies after all. The painter adds the smallest highlight to her lips, not enough to make her smile, just enough to make you believe she might. It's a risk, because even now patrons demand restraint. One nobleman recently refused delivery of his wife's portrait, claiming she looked too familiar. Another had an artist redo an entire mouth because it invited interpretation. That's how dangerous expression still was. Yet the artists kept pushing. One of them, a Scottish portraitist named Alan Ramsay, once wrote that truth gives more grace than flattery. He meant that art loses beauty when it loses honesty. He wasn't talking about politics, but he might as well have been. you realize the rebellion wasn't loud, it was brushstroke by brushstroke, smile by almost smile. Painters learned to encode sympathy in their work, to slip tenderness through the cracks of royal protocol. A softened eye could say, "I see you." A hint of warmth in the lips could whisper, "You're still human." You move closer to one of the sketches, a queen with her child, their heads tilted together. It's not a formal pose. Her hair is slightly undone, her face unguarded. You can see laughter hiding just behind composure. It feels like catching someone mid-secret. You understand suddenly that these were acts of quiet rebellion, not only by the artists but by the women themselves, because some of them began asking for it. Letters from this era reveal fascinating clues. I wish to be painted with more affection than ceremony. I hope my likeness will please those who love me, not those who judge me. Let me look alive. You can almost imagine the whispered conspiracies between sitter and painter, the quick, forbidden joke, the shared smile neither dared admit was there. You catch the painter's voice again, softer now. "They say I flatter them," he mutters. "They never see how they flatter me, by trusting me with the truth." And it dawns on you, this isn't just rebellion, it's intimacy. After centuries of being painted as ideas, royal women were finally painted as people. And though most of those portraits were still edited, still smoothed, still appropriate, the crack in the tradition had opened. You think of it like a hairline fracture in marble. So small no one notices at first, but spreading slowly, quietly, until the entire statue trembles. These portraits, these almost smiles, were that fracture. You glance once more at the finished canvas. The Queen looks serene, yes, but alive. The light in her eyes feels unguarded, like she might step down from the frame any second. The painter cleans his brushes and says, almost to himself, "Someday they'll let them smile for real." You want to tell him he's right, that centuries later they will. That the world will one day look back at these still faces and see, not silence, but the beginning of speech. But before you can answer, the room fades again. The smell of paint thins into memory. The hum of rebellion dissolves into the quiet, and you're left standing in a corridor lined with portraits that no longer look quite so lifeless. Because once you've seen the secret behind them, the trembling lip, the suppressed laughter, the tiny act of mercy in every brushstroke, you can't unsee it. Every royal stillness now seems alive, full of whispers, every painted mouth almost smiling, every silence charged with intent. You turn to leave, and you swear one of the portraits follows you with her eyes. And just before the door closes, you see it. The faintest quiver at the corner of her lips, not defiance, not obedience, just the first sign of freedom. The air feels different now, less candle smoke, more daylight. You step through a doorway and find yourself in a painter's parlour that smells of varnish and tea rather than turpentine and incense. The year might be 1820, maybe 1830. The old kingdoms have begun to crumble, and the new ones, industrial, restless, democratic, are just finding their voice. On the wall, portraits still hang, but the rules have changed. You recognize the brushwork immediately. The Enlightenment has touched everything. Light pours in from the windows like an idea that refuses to be ignored. The women here aren't saints or marble goddesses anymore. They're mothers, readers, thinkers. They gaze not at heaven, but at the horizon. And, miracle of miracles, some of them are smiling. Not the mischievous smirk of French portraiture, nor the polite tightness of English decorum. These smiles are real. They breathe. They belong to people who've begun to believe that they might exist beyond their portraits. You approach one canvas in particular. The sitter is in her 30s, dressed simply by royal standards. White muslin gown, hair unpowdered, no jewels save for a small brooch at her collar. Her smile is faint but confident, the kind that doesn't need permission. The nameplate reads Louise of Mecklenburg-Strelitz, 1810, Queen Louise of Prussia. She was adored by her people, and for good reason. She'd dared to speak publicly during a time when royal women were supposed to be ornamental. She'd met with Napoleon himself to plead for mercy for her defeated nation. She'd wept when she needed to and laughed when she could. She was mortal and beloved for it. When her portrait was unveiled, critics called her expression dangerously tender. One bishop complained that a queen should not invite sympathy, but that's exactly what she did. Her smile became a quiet revolution. Historians still argue whether it marked a turning point or a passing fad, but it was clear something had shifted. The royal woman was no longer only a symbol of stability, she was becoming a symbol of humanity. The Enlightenment had planted a new seed. Emotion was not weakness, it was proof of soul. And the artists responded. Gone were the rigid poses and symmetrical perfection. In their place came intimacy. Portraits began to show queens with their children, princesses at pianos, duchesses reading letters. Smiles were small but significant, tender, private, believable. You glance at another canvas nearby, painted by Thomas Lawrence. His sitter, a young noblewoman, turns her head toward the viewer with a faintly amused expression, her lips parted, as though she's about to speak. It's startling how modern she looks, how alive. This is the age of reason colliding with emotion, the brief, golden moment before photography steals the stage. You imagine what it must have felt like for a painter to hear his sitter say, "Make me look like myself." A century ago, that would have been scandalous. Now, it was a request. And for royal women, that meant freedom, at least in the smallest ways. Of course, not everyone welcomed it. Traditionalists accused painters of sentimental vulgarity. One critic complained that too much feeling on a royal face invited familiarity where reverence should reign. But the tide was turning, because the public, ordinary people, not courtiers, adored it. They wanted to see warmth, not worship. When a portrait of Queen Charlotte was shown in London in 1812, crowds marvelled that she looked like a real woman, not an emblem. They found comfort in her faint smile, in the slight softness around her eyes. She looks as though she has known both joy and grief, one observer wrote, and therefore she is ours. That was the beginning of the royal face as empathy, not authority. You move through the room, and you can feel the change growing stronger. The old hierarchies are cracking, the portraits begin to show motion, gesture, even humour. There's a painting of a princess with her hand resting on a dog's head. The brush captures the exact moment before the animal turns its muzzle upward. The princess is laughing, openly, carelessly. It's shocking, and yet utterly right. The painter must have known how far he could go. There's rebellion in the brushwork, but also tenderness. It's as if the artist and sitter together are conspiring to humanize the crown. And perhaps they are. After centuries of being reduced to symbols, royal women were rediscovering personhood, slowly, cautiously, but undeniably. You pause by a small charcoal sketch pinned to the wall. A study of a queen in profile. There's no jewellery, no pomp, just the gentle curve of her mouth, unmistakably smiling. You trace the lines with your eyes and think about all the invisible women before her, the ones who couldn't smile, who were told to hold still, to disappear into the myth. Now, at last, someone has decided they deserve to exist. And that thought feels like a kind of vindication. You hear footsteps behind you. It's the painter carrying a mug of tea, his cuffs rolled, his hair dusted with chalk. He notices you studying the sketches and smiles. They never know what they want, these patrons, he says. They say, make her majestic, and when I do, they complain she looks too distant. Then they say, make her gentle, and when I do, they say, she looks too human, I've stopped listening. He glances toward the half-finished portrait on his easel. I paint what's there, even if they don't see it yet. He wipes his brush on a rag, sighs and adds, someday they'll understand that a queen's smile is not a threat, it's a story. You watch as he lifts the brush again and adds the faintest hint of light at the corner of the woman's mouth. It's barely visible, but it changes everything. For centuries, that single gesture would have been erased or hidden under glaze. Now it glows like hope. You realize you're witnessing the moment the royal portrait stops being propaganda and starts being a portrait again. The woman on the canvas isn't a saint or an idea. She's simply alive. When the light hits her face, she almost seems to move. And somewhere, deep within the paint, you can hear her whisper to all the silent women before her. I smiled for you. You find yourself standing in a new kind of room. Gone are the oil lamps and gilded frames. The air smells faintly of chemicals and damp cloth. There's a strange hum, a slow ticking, and a bright burst of light that feels like thunder made visible. You blink, disoriented. A man steps forward, adjusting a brass machine on a tripod. Hold still, please, he says. Don't move, not even your eyes. You're in a photography studio. The year is somewhere around 1845. A queen stands before the camera, frozen mid-breath. Her name is Victoria. Her age, 26. Her face, still as marble. Behind her, the photographer lowers his head under a black cloth and opens the lens. The exposure will take 20 seconds. That means no movement, no blinking, no smile. And just like that, centuries of stillness find their perfect new prison. The irony hits you instantly. After all that progress, after painters had finally learned to capture warmth and motion, the camera arrives and reinstates stillness as the law. Historians like to romanticize this moment, but you can feel the frustration crackling in the air. The Queen's shoulders are tense. She's been told this image will define her reign. Majesty, the photographer murmurs, if you could look serene. She already does. She's practiced serenity since birth. The light flashes. The image is captured, one of the first royal photographs in history. When it's developed, it will show her exactly as the world expects her to be, composed, noble, unsmiling. But what the photograph doesn't show is what happens a second later. Victoria exhales, rubs her eyes and smiles, wide, spontaneous, unguarded. And for that instant, she looks like herself. The photographer, still fumbling with his plates, doesn't capture it. But one assistant does, quietly, without asking. He clicks the shutter again. The exposure is poor, the focus soft, but there it is. The Queen smiling, eyes creased, utterly human. The image will remain hidden in a private collection for over a century. When historians rediscover it, they'll be astonished. Victoria smiling, they'll write, as though the act were a miracle. But really she was just being alive between instructions. The irony is almost cruel. The technology that should have revealed truth, instead, reinforced performance. Because in the early years of photography, smiling was nearly impossible. The long exposures made it impractical, and the social codes made it improper. The result? A new visual vocabulary of solemnity. The painted stillness of old royal portraits had simply evolved into the photographic stare. You watch as one aristocratic sitter after another takes her turn before the lens, corseted, gloved, and rigid. The photographer barks out the same command again and again. Hold! Hold still! and stillness, once an aesthetic choice, becomes physics. Even the tiniest smile blurs into a ghostly smear of teeth and motion. It's strange to think how much of our idea of the Victorian mood comes from this technical quirk. People look grim not because they were joyless, but because the cameras couldn't keep up with laughter. Historians still argue about whether this practical restraint evolved into emotional repression, or if the era was already inclined towards solemnity. But the results are the same, a century of photographs where humanity hides behind composure. And once again, royal women set the tone. Queen Victoria's stoic portraits became the gold standard of dignity, copies hung in schools, post offices, and embassies across the empire. Her face became shorthand for control. Children learned that queens didn't laugh, subjects learned that power didn't smile. The entire world was taught to trust stillness over expression. You stand beside the Queen's ghostly image as it's printed. Her face is a little blurred, her eyes enormous, her mouth sealed. There's no hint of warmth, but you sense the strain beneath it, the effort it takes to look unbreakable for 20 full seconds. She glances at the result and says nothing. The photographer beams. "Majesty looks magnificent," he insists. Victoria nods politely. She doesn't believe him. She knows what she actually looks like, alive, imperfect, capable of laughter and temper alike. She knows the image will erase all that. And maybe, she thinks, that's what they want. For a moment, you catch her reflection in the glass of the camera lens. It's different from the print, softer, warmer. She's smiling faintly, almost wistfully, as if aware of the contradiction she's become. A monarch of progress trapped in a photograph of restraint. You step back, and the scene shifts again. It's later now, decades later, and photography has become faster. Exposure times drop from minutes to seconds. Faces move again. But the damage has already been done. The global habit of the unsmiling portrait is too deeply ingrained. Even when cameras could catch a smile, people hesitated. A century of etiquette doesn't vanish with the flick of a shutter. You leaf through an album lying open on a table. Page after page of noblewomen stare back at you, composed, perfect, distant. Every one of them carrying the same expression that began hundreds of years earlier with the first queen who was told not to move. And yet as you turn the last page, you find one image that breaks the pattern. It's Queen Alexandra, wife of Edward VII. She's seated in a garden, surrounded by her dogs, laughing outright. The photo is candid, imperfect, beautiful. Her hair is loose, her expression unguarded. It's a tiny rebellion printed in silver nitrate. She would become the first British royal to be photographed smiling publicly, setting off mild outrage in polite society. Newspapers describe the image as charming yet unqueenly. But the public loved it. After centuries of porcelain perfection, they finally saw something human. You smile too because you can feel the crack widening, the one that started in secret sketches and forbidden smirks now breaking through the lens itself. The stillness is dying, slowly, photograph by photograph, second by second. The face of royalty is learning how to live again. And though most of those old portraits still hang unchanged, you now know the truth. Behind every solemn gaze there was always movement, suppressed, stretched, waiting. You close the album and the room falls silent except for the ticking of a clock. 100 years of women held still so the world could stay steady. Now, at last, you can almost hear them exhale. When you open your eyes again, you're not in a palace or a studio at all. You're outside, standing in a walled garden on a warm summer morning, somewhere around 1910. The air smells of lilac and linen, of earth after rain. A woman stands a few yards away, sunlight tangled in her hat's wide brim. She turns, and you recognize her immediately, a queen, but not quite like any before her. Her name is Mary, Queen Mary of Teck, consort to George V, the grandmother of a future queen, the matriarch of a century about to forget everything that came before. You've seen her portraits, of course, the ones where she looks carved from composure, chin high, expression unreadable. But here, in the garden, she's smiling. Not widely, not rebelliously, just a private, soft smile as she bends to pluck a flower. It's gone the moment she straightens up, the mask returning before anyone else notices. But for that heartbeat, you catch it, the ghost of warmth under centuries of etiquette. Her lady-in-waiting hovers nearby. "Majesty, the photographer is waiting." Mary nods, brushing dirt from her gloves. "Yes, I suppose he is." And just like that, she's royal again, every gesture precise, every breath measured. You follow her to the terrace, where a man with a camera waits under a black cloth. The setup is elegant, formal, stifling. Chairs draped in velvet, flags arranged just so. This will be one of the early colour photographs of the British monarchy, a milestone in modernity. And yet, watching her sit for it, you realise nothing has changed. The camera clicks. The face that will appear in magazines and schoolrooms is serene, graceful, and utterly remote. The smile she had in the garden, real, human, is nowhere to be seen. And you can almost hear her thinking, the public prefers marble. But marble doesn't breathe. The world around her, however, is beginning to. Because outside the palace gates, everything is shifting. Women are marching, shouting, being arrested. Suffragettes in long skirts smash windows and chain themselves to railings, their faces, furious, unpolished, alive, captured by the same cameras that freeze queens into silence. Their expressions are everything the portraits never allowed: anger, joy, determination, defiance. For centuries, royal women have been trained to not show what these women are shouting into the world: emotion, belief, hunger for autonomy. And suddenly, for the first time, history begins to notice the difference. Newspapers run side-by-side photographs, one of the calm queen, dignified and proper, another of the suffragette, open-mouthed in mid-cry. The contrast becomes symbolic: order versus chaos, tradition versus rebellion. You can see why the monarchy clings to restraint. In turbulent times, stillness is stability. But the cost is enormous. Mary's own letters reveal her exhaustion with endless presentation. "How wearying it is," she writes, "to be always required to appear composed when one's heart is not." She writes that sentence in 1917 during the First World War, when every day brings news of death. It's impossible to imagine the burden, mourning in silence while the world expects serenity. You look at her face in a wartime photograph, a small brooch pinned to her coat, her eyes fixed on something unseen. She's still unsmiling, but the stillness feels different now. It's not vanity, it's fortitude, a mask of survival, not performance. And in that she becomes the hinge between centuries, the last of the marble queens and the first of the modern ones. Historians still argue about her legacy. Some call her cold, others call her dignified. Both are true. What they often miss is that she lived through an age where women were learning to reclaim expression, even as she was required to suppress it for the sake of the crown. Behind her public silence, the world is roaring. You imagine what she must have thought, reading headlines about women winning the right to vote. Did she envy them, admire them, fear the chaos their freedom represented? She never said. But one can't help noticing that after her death, her granddaughter, the next queen, would adopt her poise, but soften her gaze. The old marble stillness was evolving again. You turn your eyes to a small, framed photograph on the terrace table. It's an informal one, taken by a family member. Queen Mary is laughing, actually laughing with her children. Her mouth is open, her teeth visible. She's caught mid-motion, half turning toward the camera. It's blurry, imperfect, glorious. That photograph was never meant for the public. It stayed in an album for decades, buried among private memories. But it exists, proof that the mask had cracks and that behind the composure lived an ordinary breathing woman who could find joy even within her golden cage. The camera changed everything, but it also trapped her twice, once in duty and once in visibility. There's no longer any privacy, not even in restraint. You look around the garden again, the trimmed hedges, the neat flower beds. It's beautiful, but it feels like a metaphor for her life. Everything precise, cultivated, contained. You can almost hear her voice, measured and weary. If the crown demands composure, I must give it, but sometimes I wonder whether the crown ever sees the face that wears it. And perhaps that's the quiet tragedy of all royal women before and after her. Their portraits might change styles, oil to daguerreotype to film, but the expectation remains the same. Stillness equals strength. The suffragettes' cameras captured rebellion. The royal photographers captured continuity. But in between, in the invisible space between the clicks of those shutters, there was the truth. All those women, queens and commoners alike, learning in real time how to hold power and remain human. You walk back toward the gate. The afternoon light is golden now, flickering through the leaves. Behind you, in the garden, Queen Mary kneels again to pick another flower. For a moment she smiles, small and secret. No lens catches it. No audience applauds, but you see it. And for that instant, her entire lineage of unsmiling women seems to exhale through her, through you, through time itself. A quiet inheritance passed in the brief curl of a lip. A reminder that even in silence, expression survives. The air around you hums faintly, the 20th century awakening, engines roaring, cities glowing, empires trembling. The smell of coal replaces the scent of beeswax. The world has discovered electricity, cinema, and consequence. And suddenly, the royal face, that ancient emblem of poise and permanence, must now learn to move. You find yourself in a darkened room filled with the soft whir of machinery. It takes a second to realize what you're seeing, a film projector. The light flickers, a reel spins, and the first moving image of a monarch stutters onto a white screen. It's 1923, the wedding of Prince Albert, the future King George VI, and Lady Elizabeth Bowes-Lyon, soon to be known as the Queen Mother. The film is grainy, the light uneven, the expressions strange and cautious. But even through the imperfections you feel it, a small, seismic shift. For the first time, the royal face moves before the public eye. You watch as Lady Elizabeth, radiant in lace, steps out of the cathedral into sunlight. The crowd erupts. She turns toward them, waves, and smiles, broadly, unapologetically. It's not the painted, measured smile of her predecessors. It's something alive, impulsive, real. And the people lose their minds. Newspapers print stills of her expression as though it's a miracle. One headline calls it the smile that saved the monarchy. Another, more skeptical, warns that it might encourage a dangerous familiarity between the sovereign and the subject. Historians still argue whether her charm was a deliberate strategy or a natural instinct, but either way, she understood what her ancestors never could, that in a century defined by motion and mass media, stillness no longer looked strong. It looked cold. So she smiled, and that smile became her armor. You step closer to the flickering image. Her movements are fluid, graceful, but never rigid. You realize that she's performing a new kind of royalty, one that replaces divinity with warmth. She waves not like a saint bestowing blessing, but like a neighbor greeting you from across the street. For the first time in 500 years, the royal woman's face is allowed to belong to her. You can almost feel the relief in the frame. But make no mistake, this isn't freedom, not really. It's a new performance, just a different choreography. The stillness of Queen's past has been replaced by the pleasantness of Queen's present, a soft dictatorship of charm. Royalty has discovered public relations, and in that discovery lies both liberation and trap, because where once they were painted into silence, now they are filmed into endless smiling. You move through decades of footage, coronations, christenings, parades. Every reel begins the same way: the open carriage, the cheering crowds, the fixed wave, the immaculate smile. The body still stiff, the teeth still white, the heart still hidden. By the 1930s, cinema newsreels have turned monarchy into theatre. Every frame is a contract. They smile, you obey. But then, the war. The smiles change. It's 1940 now. You're watching Queen Elizabeth, the same woman who once beamed on her wedding day, standing outside a bombed building in London. Dust coats her coat. The rubble glints behind her. She smiles still, but the expression has weight. It's no longer the performance of happiness. It's defiance in disguise. Someone shouts from the crowd, "We're glad you've been bombed too, Your Majesty." And she smiles wider. "Now I can look the East End in the face," she replies. That smile, weary, resilient, human, becomes one of the defining images of wartime Britain. You realize that the smile, once forbidden, has evolved into something far more powerful, an instrument of survival. Through the mid-1940s, as Europe burns, royal smiles are rationed like sugar, precious, deliberate, symbolic. Each one a reminder that composure doesn't have to mean indifference. And when the war ends, something extraordinary happens. The monarchy, once distant, becomes domestic. Cameras move from palaces to kitchens, from thrones to tea tables. The Queen Mother and her daughters are photographed laughing together, sitting on picnic blankets, petting corgis. The public eats it up. For the first time, the monarchy feels knowable. It's a revolution, carried out with nothing but facial muscles. You step back from the screen, letting the flickering light wash over you. The image has changed again. Now it's 1953, the coronation of Elizabeth II. The new queen, young and luminous, appears on the first live international television broadcast. Tens of millions of people watch her face in real time. And though she rarely smiles during the ceremony, the few times she does, the quick, fleeting moments as she waves from the balcony, the crowd roars. That's the paradox of modern monarchy. The people no longer want their rulers to be divine. They want them to look alive, but that demand comes with a new kind of tyranny. A smile, once forbidden, is now expected. If a queen looked too solemn, she was accused of coldness, too cheerful, and she was deemed unserious, the same double bind rewritten for the age of film. Historians still debate whether Elizabeth's famous composure was a relic of the old tradition or a deliberate adaptation to the new one. But perhaps it was both. She learned that the face of royalty must never be entirely real, only reassuring. So she smiled carefully and never too broadly, never too long. A smile that said you're safe, even when she wasn't. You stand alone in the projection room as the last reel clicks to an end. The film snaps, the light dies, and silence fills the air once more. But this silence feels different. For the first time, it's not the silence of repression. It's the silence that follows applause. Because after centuries of stillness, the royal smile has finally returned to the world, not as vanity, not as rebellion, as a kind of promise, and yet deep down you sense the old curse lingering beneath it. the centuries-old demand that a woman's face must always mean something to someone else. The portraits have changed medium, but the gaze hasn't disappeared. Still, as the projector winds down, you think back to that first smile, the grainy frame of a young queen stepping into sunlight, radiant and unafraid. You realize it wasn't just her face that changed history. It was the fact that, for the first time, the world was finally ready to see her. The world outside the palace gates is louder now. Cars honk, planes roar overhead, television antennas sprout like weeds from rooftops. It's the mid-20th century, an era of flash bulbs, tabloids, and television sets glowing in every living room. You stand on a London street corner as people crowd around a shop window, watching a small black-and-white screen. The Queen's face appears, young, regal, poised. Her expression is calm as always. The crowd sighs in admiration. But then a small boy tugs on his mother's sleeve. "Why doesn't she smile more?" he asks. The mother hushes him, though she doesn't have an answer. And there it is again, the question that has haunted royal women for centuries, reborn for the age of cameras. Why doesn't she smile? Only now the tone has changed. It's no longer condemnation for smiling too much, but expectation that she smile on command. The double bind is back, wearing lipstick and television makeup. You follow the Queen through the decades, coronations, jubilees, global tours. The camera follows her everywhere, patient and hungry. Every slight movement of her face is recorded, replayed, and interpreted. When she smiles too widely, tabloids call it undignified. When she looks solemn, they call her frosty. Historians still argue whether Elizabeth II was the most visible or the most invisible monarch in history. Millions of people saw her face every day, and yet almost no one knew what she felt. Her expression became a Rorschach test, calm enough for people to project whatever they wanted onto it. You imagine the weight of that, a woman who must not only rule but perform reassurance. At a Commonwealth tour in 1961, the cameras catch a brief, unscripted moment. A small girl trips during a ceremony, spilling a bouquet at the Queen's feet. Elizabeth bends down, picks up the flowers, and smiles. Wide, radiant, real. The crowd gasps as though witnessing a miracle. Newspapers run the photo for weeks. The Queen's tender gesture. Her Majesty's human side. One genuine smile becomes global news. That's how starved the world still is for authenticity. But something's changing under the surface. The 1960s arrive, and with them, rebellion. Youth culture explodes. Models grin on magazine covers, politicians laugh on talk shows. Emotion is fashionable again, and suddenly the old royal restraint looks ancient. The monarchy faces a new crisis, not of power, but of relatability. The public no longer wants a divine symbol, they want a celebrity. So the royal household adapts. Behind palace doors, advisors whisper the new rule: be seen to be smiling. It's both command and curse. The Queen begins smiling more often in public appearances, though the gestures are subtle, the careful upward tilt of the lips, the gracious nod, the polite laughter at rehearsed moments. The crown learns to choreograph warmth, but you can tell it's still calculated, a relic of centuries of self-control. Then something happens that the old courts could never have imagined: the rise of the royal photograph as currency. The world wants images, hundreds, thousands daily, magazines, postcards, souvenirs, posters. Every smile becomes a product, a headline, a myth. And into this new world steps another royal woman who changes everything. Diana. The camera loves her. And for the first time in royal history, she loves it back. When she smiles, it's not measured or polite. It's luminous, uncontrolled, alive. She looks at people, not past them. She hugs children, jokes with reporters, dances with presidents. It's the kind of warmth the world has been craving for centuries. The antidote to centuries of porcelain composure. The public calls her the people's princess. The establishment calls her a problem, because her humanity doesn't fit the mold. Historians still argue whether Diana's charisma saved or endangered the monarchy, but what's certain is this: her smile, captured in millions of photographs, rewrote the visual language of royalty. For 500 years, queens had been trained to conceal emotion. She weaponized it. Every camera flash that used to freeze faces now released hers into motion. You remember one image in particular, taken in Angola, 1997. She's kneeling beside a young amputee, holding his hand, smiling softly, eyes bright with compassion. It's not a performance, it's presence. That photo travels farther and faster than any royal portrait in history. It's not the smile of diplomacy or endurance or defiance. It's the smile of recognition, the opposite of distance. And yet, even she pays the ancient price. Because when the smile fades, the cameras turn feral. The same media that worshipped her warmth devours her grief, her exhaustion, her tears. The public, addicted to her humanity, can't forgive her for being human. And suddenly you realize what history has been doing all along, turning women's faces into mirrors for everyone's desires but their own. The smile was never for them. It was always for us. You step out of the press scrum, out of the flashbulbs, back into the quiet. It feels wrong somehow to call any of this progress. The painted stillness has simply been replaced by the smiling performance. The pressure remains. Only the mask has changed texture. But maybe you think that's the point. Each generation of royal women inherits not freedom, but a choice. How to be looked at. Diana chose warmth. The Queen chose composure. Both choices demanded sacrifice. And now, as the century turns, another face will appear, one that carries all their ghosts in her expression. The last stillness, the last smile, the next chapter. You can almost hear the cameras warming up. You wake to the sound of clicking shutters. Dozens of them, maybe hundreds. The light is harsher now, digital and cold. You can tell it's the 21st century because no one is still. Even silence hums with Wi-Fi. You're standing on a balcony again, but this time the air smells of rain and camera ozone, not incense. It's 2011 and a young woman in white steps forward into the roar of the crowd. Catherine Middleton, the new Duchess of Cambridge. Her smile is bright, practiced, impossibly composed. You can almost see the ghosts of every queen before her folded inside it. Elizabeth's calm, Mary's poise, Diana's warmth. The crowd cheers. The flashes burst like fireworks. And for the first time in history, billions are watching not through paint or engraving or film, but through pixels. You blink and the balcony becomes an ocean of screens, phones held high. Everyone wants to catch the moment when she waves, when she smiles, when she becomes more symbol than person. A woman's face as public property again. But something is different. This time she knows it. You can feel it in the way she holds herself. No longer pretending not to perform, but performing with precision. Her smile is steady but not false. Her eyes move deliberately from face to face, claiming ownership of the gaze that once owned her predecessors. Historians will later call this era the monarchy's digital rebirth. But what it really is survival, because the royal portrait has gone live. Every frame, every blink, every breath is archived and analysed. The internet does what medieval courts and Victorian cameras could only dream of. It turns every expression into data. Too happy, one headline says. Too cold, another replies. Too perfect, says the next. There is no correct smile, only infinite judgment. You remember the line from centuries ago, be still, be perfect, be unreadable. The words echo across history like a command coded into blood. And yet here she is, smiling anyway. That's the quiet miracle of it. In a world where everything is recorded, her control lies in the illusion of spontaneity. She laughs softly as she turns to her husband. The sound is brief, but the cameras catch it. By morning, it's everywhere. That laugh, frozen mid-frame, dissected by tabloids, memified by strangers. You realize with a shiver that even joy has become currency, but you can't deny its power. That same photograph, her smile radiant against a storm of lenses, will circulate around the world within minutes, seen by more people than any royal painting in history. And despite everything, the scrutiny, the algorithms, the gossip, it works. People feel something, hope, nostalgia, belonging. Her smile in that moment does what royal stillness once did. It holds a fractured world together for half a heartbeat. That's the strange evolution of the royal face. Once it existed to calm God's subjects, now it exists to calm the internet. You wander through the timeline, images flickering past like modern stained glass. The Queen in pastel blue, her expression tender as she greets school children. Meghan Markle, laughing unguarded at an outdoor event, her face caught mid-motion, mid-controversy. Princess Anne, stoic as ever, refusing the performative smile entirely, each woman rewriting the same script, each smile, or lack of one, becoming a political act. Historians still argue whether these modern royals are reclaiming the gaze or merely surviving it, but maybe the distinction no longer matters, because unlike their painted ancestors, these women can see themselves reflected back instantly. They know the cost of the smile in real time. You think of the moments we never see, the car door closing, the breath exhaled after the crowd disappears. Somewhere, in those small seconds, the centuries-old discipline of stillness still hums in their bones, a private muscle memory of composure. And yet you suspect they smile in private differently now, not as performance or politics, but as reclamation, a smile no camera can own. There's one more face flickering on the screen ahead of you, an older one now, the late Queen Elizabeth II, standing on a balcony during her Platinum Jubilee. She's dressed in silver, her expression calm, her body frail. And then, almost imperceptibly, she smiles. Not the polite one, not the trained one, but something else. It's softer, freer, as if all the centuries of expectation have finally grown too heavy to carry. For once, she doesn't seem to be holding the world together. She seems to be letting it go. The image will circle the globe, captioned, Her Majesty's Final Smile. People will write that it looked like farewell. And perhaps it was, because with her passing, something ends. The long lineage of queens taught to wear silence like armor. The women who follow her, Catherine, Meghan, Charlotte, will live in a world that watches even closer but judges slightly less. A world that finally, if only faintly, allows complexity. And one day, centuries from now, a historian will scroll through these digital portraits and wonder the same thing you're wondering now. When the faces of royal women finally smiled again, did they do it for us? Or for themselves? You turn from the glowing screen, the hum of pixels fading behind you. The air outside is cool and quiet, almost medieval in its calm. Somewhere in the distance, church bells ring, not for coronations or executions, but simply for time passing. You exhale, and the sound feels centuries old. The story that began with silence has ended with a smile. And though the cameras are still flashing and the faces still performing, you know the truth now, that every royal stillness was never emptiness. It was waiting. Waiting for this. Waiting for the moment when the woman behind the portrait could finally look straight into the lens and decide, for the first time in 500 years, that her expression belonged to her. She doesn't need permission anymore. She just smiles. And the world, finally, smiles back. The light shifts again, cooler, sharper, unmistakably modern. You're standing not in a palace or gallery now, but in a quiet museum. Rows of visitors move slowly through softly lit halls. The air smells faintly of wood polish and whispered awe. Before you, hanging on a wide grey wall, is the history you've been walking through all along. 5 centuries of royal faces. You take a few steps closer. Here they all are. Elizabeth the powdered and luminous, her lead-white stillness glittering beneath the varnish. Anne of Austria, lips pressed into obedience. Mary Tudor, marble calm. Catherine de' Medici, porcelain perfect and poisonous beneath it. Then the slow evolution, Queen Charlotte's weary serenity, Marie Antoinette's brief warmth, Louise of Prussia's fragile tenderness. The camera age comes next. Victoria's granite dignity, Alexandra's defiant laughter, Mary of Tech's tragic restraint. And then the shift. Elizabeth Bowes-Lyon's compassionate poise, Elizabeth II's composure turned grace, Diana's lightning warmth, Catherine's careful radiance. It's like watching the human face learn to breathe again, 1 century at a time. The museum visitors murmur softly as they move along the line of portraits. You overhear a few comments. She looks so calm. She looks so sad. She looks powerful. But no one asks what it cost. You move closer until you can see the brushstrokes. Beneath the layers of glaze, you realize how fragile the illusion always was. The perfect calmness isn't seamless. It's built over cracks and corrections, over faces repainted again and again until the humanity nearly disappeared. And you think of the painters too. The men and the few women who spent their lives painting masks onto people who could never take them off. The silence feels enormous here. And then on the far wall you notice a small new display, a screen softly glowing, its looping video footage, the modern royals, Elizabeth, Diana, Meghan, Catherine, all in motion. Not paintings, not stills, but living expressions, smiling, frowning, blinking, laughing. You realize you've been walking through 500 years of stillness just to reach this, a moving face. The screen shows the late Queen Elizabeth II greeting schoolchildren, her expression soft, her laugh genuine. Then it shifts to Diana dancing at the White House, radiant and unguarded. Meghan crouched to talk to a child, Catherine squinting into sunlight and grinning despite herself. The transformation is staggering. For the first time, the royal smile no longer hides the truth. It is the truth. Historians still argue about whether this evolution marks the end of mystique or the beginning of a new kind of authenticity. But you can feel it. The tension that haunted those early portraits, the fear of being read, misunderstood, devoured, is still there, but softer now. They've learned to live with visibility. And you, standing here centuries later, can finally see the through line, from stillness to performance. From performance to rebellion, from rebellion to ownership. You remember Elizabeth III's face cracking under poison paint, Anne Boleyn's smile at the scaffold, Marie Antoinette's calm before the blade, Victoria's stoic portrait, and Diana's luminous, doomed grin. Each one of them contributed to this final frame, a woman smiling freely, not because she must, but because she can. You pause and let that realization settle. It's strange how something as small as a human smile could hold so much history. Behind you, a museum guide begins her quiet lecture for a new group of visitors. You linger, listening. In earlier centuries, she says, royal women were expected to embody virtue through restraint. Their stillness was read as piety, dignity, and self-control. Smiling was considered too human, too mortal. Over time, the smile became a sign of empathy, of connection, of sovereignty reimagined as service. These faces tell us less about power than about permission. Permission, the word hangs in the air like a secret, finally spoken aloud. You look at the modern screen again, the Queen Mother's smile in the Blitz, Elizabeth II's restrained grin on the balcony, Diana's laughter, alive and doomed, Catherine's careful warmth. It's all permission, inherited, reshaped, reclaimed. But what comes next? You imagine the future portraits, not painted or printed, but holographic, interactive, changing as you move, faces that can smile or not smile, depending on who's watching. Perhaps one day a queen will step out of her frame entirely, speak for herself, tell her story unfiltered, and, perhaps when she does, she'll say what every woman in this gallery has wanted to say since the first brushstroke fell on the first pale cheek. I was never still. You just never saw me move. The lights dim slightly, signaling closing time. Visitors drift toward the exit. You take one last look at the faces on the wall, each one suspended between silence and speech, and you realize that the long history of royal stillness wasn't really about beauty or power or etiquette. It was about fear, and how women learned to survive it with grace. But the story didn't end in fear. It ended here, in motion, in the sound of laughter echoing faintly from a screen, in a smile caught halfway between restraint and release. The museum attendant glances your way. "Last call," she says softly. You nod, take one last step toward the glowing screen, and whisper to the smiling faces, "They see you now." And for a fleeting moment, you think one of them, maybe all of them, smiles back. You step out of the museum and into the evening air. The sky is a soft violet, the kind that makes the city feel briefly timeless. The hum of cars fades into the distance, replaced by the low chatter of people heading home, their laughter floating through the dusk. You breathe deeply, and it hits you. How long this story has been traveling. 5 centuries of faces, all painted, posed, photographed, pixelated. 5 centuries of silence, of carefully managed grace, and 5 centuries of slow, stubborn rebellion blooming like light behind closed lips. You walk down the quiet street, passing through reflections of yourself in glass windows. In each pane, your face stares back, caught mid-expression. Sometimes you look calm, sometimes distant, sometimes just barely. You catch a smile, and for a moment you realize you've been part of this story all along, because this isn't just about royal women, it's about every person who's ever learned to measure emotion before showing it. Every face that's practiced composure before courage. You stop beside a cafe window where a television plays a royal documentary. The narrator's voice is low and reverent. In the modern era, the monarchy has had to balance tradition with transparency. The smile is their bridge. Inside, 2 women watch the screen over steaming cups of tea. "She's beautiful," one says. "She looks tired," the other replies. And they both might be right. You watch for a while longer. The footage shows Catherine, Duchess of Cambridge, meeting a crowd, waving, laughing, leaning close to speak to a little girl who offers her flowers. The camera zooms in on that moment. Her smile is unforced, kind, quietly radiant. It's not the practiced smile of a woman hiding. It's the grounded smile of someone who knows she's seen and chooses not to flinch. You realize what's changed. The gaze isn't something to survive anymore. It's something to negotiate. Royal women now understand the transaction better than anyone. The trade between visibility and privacy, reverence and realism. Historians still argue whether this is progress or just evolution of the same performance. But watching her on that screen, you suspect it's both. Every smile now carries not just history, but agency. You keep walking through a narrow street lined with flickering lamplight. In the glow, you see the centuries overlap. The faint shimmer of a Tudor ruff, the glint of a French fan, the heavy crown of an empress flickering like an after-image. They're all walking with you now, those women, from portraits and photographs. Elizabeth I and her white paint, cracked and ghostly. Anne Boleyn, her half-smile sharp as a blade. Marie Antoinette, laughing just once before the blade falls. Victoria frowning against the flash. Diana glowing through the chaos. Their silence hums in the air like electricity. You imagine them whispering to the modern women who inherited their stillness. Smile if you want, not because you must. The line feels like a benediction, centuries late, but true at last. And yet the tension remains. Even now, every photograph of a royal woman still walks a razor's edge, too soft, and she's weak, too stern, and she's cold, too beautiful, and she's a distraction, too plain, and she's irrelevant. You think of that delicate, impossible choreography, the balance between relatability and reverence. How, in a world that demands both transparency and myth, the smile must mean everything and nothing at once. The monarchy has always been theatre. But now the actors write their own lines. You reach the edge of the park, where the city noise softens into wind and the faint rustle of trees. A fountain gurgles nearby, steady, rhythmic, ancient. The water reflects the evening lights like a moving painting. You pause beside it and see your reflection ripple. The image fragments into 1,000 versions of yourself, each with a different expression. Some solemn, some amused, some still, some smiling. It occurs to you that maybe that's the final lesson hidden in all those royal faces. Stillness was never the absence of emotion. It was the containment of it, with the discipline of carrying everything without breaking. And smiling, truly smiling, was never about rebellion or permission. It was about release. You imagine, somewhere across time, the first royal woman who dared to smile in front of a painter. Maybe she didn't mean to. Maybe the artist caught it by accident. A secret laugh escaping centuries of rules. That moment, that flicker of humanity, survived. It slipped through the cracks of tradition and travelled all the way here to this evening, to this reflection, to this breath. You smile back at your reflection. Not the tight-lipped kind, not the one for cameras, just the small, effortless one that lives somewhere behind your ribs. And for a heartbeat, it feels like all those women, queens, duchesses, painters' muses, prisoners of etiquette, are smiling with you. Not for history, not for power, not for approval, but because they can. You turn away from the fountain and start walking again, the city lights winking behind you like candle flames in an endless gallery. The air feels lighter now, softer. You've walked through 500 years of silence and come out the other side. And though the world still watches, still measures, still demands, you know the truth those painted women never could say aloud. The smile was never theirs to hide. It was always theirs to reclaim. The street fades, the city lights dissolve. You find yourself back inside a familiar kind of room. Neither palace nor museum, but something gentler, homier, like a private study. The air hums with quiet electricity. The wallpaper glows softly in the lamplight. On the desk before you lies a stack of photographs. Some are black and white, some sepia, some vivid in digital gloss. You recognize all of them. The faces you've travelled with for so long. You sit down. The top photograph shows Queen Elizabeth II as a young woman, laughing beside a horse, hair wind-blown, her mouth open mid-laughter. It's the kind of candid that looks unguarded, but somehow dignified. You flip to the next. The same woman, older now, the lines of age soft but deep, her smile measured, knowing. You realize that what changed over time wasn't the smile itself, but the context. Once it was defiance, then grace, then expectation. Now it's memory, a shorthand for continuity, a way to tell the world, I'm still here, and so are you. The next photograph is Diana. She's stepping out of a car into a sea of flashbulbs, hand-raised, smile blazing through chaos. Behind her, the bodyguards blur into shadow, but she gleams, light as armor, soft as surrender. You trace her outline with your eyes. You can feel the exhaustion beneath that brightness, how the same smile that saved her also devoured her. And suddenly you understand something. Every royal woman's smile has carried the same contradiction. It's both shield and invitation, both burden and gift. It protects and exposes at the same time. Historians will later call this the paradox of feminine power, the ability to endure by appearing accessible, to lead by being looked at. But you know better. It isn't paradox, it's endurance disguised as grace. You flip again, Catherine, Meghan, Anne, Camilla. Each face different, each smile calibrated for its moment. Catherine's smile, calm, precise, diplomatic, a bridge between warmth and decorum. Meghan's smile, radiant but watchful, connection turned self-defense. Anne's, barely there, iron dry, a protest against the expectation to perform. Camilla's, steady, unbothered, a survivor's calm acceptance of the narrative she can't control. Each one is a reply to history's question, how much of yourself can you show and still survive being seen? You lean back in the chair, the question echoing through the room. The photographs seem to shimmer, shifting faintly in the lamplight. It's as if the women themselves are here, not frozen, but waiting. You imagine them in conversation, centuries collapsed into one room, their voices overlapping. Elizabeth II. They called me cold when I chose control. Marie Antoinette. They called me vain when I showed joy. Victoria. They called me distant when I stood still. Diana. They called me dangerous when I smiled too much. Elizabeth II. And they called me timeless when I refused to change. Then silence. Heavy, shared, ancient. You can feel them all watching you as if asking what you've learned after walking so long beside them. And for the first time, you know the answer. The stillness was never about beauty. It was about boundaries. The smile was never about happiness. It was about choice. These women didn't smile because they couldn't. They smiled when they chose to. Every unsmiling portrait wasn't repression. It was communication. It said, I am not for you. And every rare, deliberate smile said, now I am. You think of how modern audiences often misread those early portraits, calling them distant, lifeless, eerie. But now you see the truth. Those still faces weren't devoid of emotion. They were full of it, compressed to the point of silence, like light trapped behind glass. You rise from the chair and walk toward a window. The reflection stares back, your own face now layered with theirs. You realize that you too have learned their art of composure, in smaller ways, the polite smile for comfort, the half-smile for uncertainty, the still face for endurance. We all carry fragments of that lineage. The royal portrait was never just a mirror for queens. It became a mirror for us. The way we navigate being seen, the way we edit ourselves for survival. Outside, the night deepens. You can see the moon reflected in the glass. A pale, ancient coin, patient as ever. It occurs to you that the moon has watched all of this unfold. The same light that brushed Elizabeth's powdered cheek now glints off smartphone screens. The light hasn't changed, only the way we hold it. You turn back to the desk. The photographs are gone now, replaced by one empty silver frame. You step closer, expecting your own reflection, but instead it's blank, like a fresh canvas. And you know why the story isn't finished. Somewhere another woman, another queen perhaps, or simply another face in another century, will add her expression to the gallery. Maybe she'll smile, maybe she won't. Either way, she'll decide. You smile at the empty frame, and for the first time you don't feel like an observer of history. You feel like part of its exhale. Because after everything, the stillness, the sorrow, the poise, the quiet victory is not in being perfect or unchanging. It's in knowing that no one can dictate the expression you wear when the world looks at you. That's the inheritance, not the crown, not the portrait, not the myth, the choice. You reach out, touch the cool, silver edge of the frame and whisper to it. Not a prayer, not a promise, just the truth that every royal woman earned and every ordinary one still needs to hear. You owe the world nothing but your presence. And in the reflection's faint gleam, you could swear you see 100 still faces finally beginning to move. You stand there for a long while, your hand resting on the edge of that silver frame, the faint reflection of your fingertips blurring into nothing. The room hums quietly. The electricity of the modern world outside, the heartbeat of centuries inside. You can almost hear the ghosts settling, but not gone, never gone. Their presence feels like silk brushing your shoulder, not haunting you, but reminding you. You turn, and the room shifts once more. The desk dissolves, the window fades, and you find yourself walking through a corridor made entirely of portraits and screens, side by side. Oil and pixels, varnish and Lee-D, the old and the new blending seamlessly. A medieval queen in rough and red velvet stares from a gold frame beside a digital display of Catherine smiling at a charity event. Their eyes align across half a millennium. One still, one alive, both equally deliberate. It's not a gallery anymore, it's a timeline made flesh. You move slowly, tracing the lineage of faces. The changes are subtle, like breathing. Chin softens, jaw lifts, lips loosen, eyes learn to meet the gaze. You whisper, half to yourself. It took 500 years for a woman to be allowed to look back. And once she did, the world had to change. You pause before one of the oldest canvases. Elizabeth I, the Virgin Queen, encased in ruffles and gold embroidery. For centuries, this portrait terrified people with its calm, unreadable power. But tonight, the light hits her differently. The paint glows faintly along her cheek. She looks almost tired. You want to tell her that her stillness worked, that her control became survival, that her refusal to smile made space for others to learn how to. Then you turn to the next screen, a looping video of Diana. Wind in her hair, laughter caught mid-motion, compassion radiating from her eyes. You want to tell her that her warmth also worked, that her openness made space for others to be imperfect, that she didn't fall from grace, she changed the definition of it. And then you realize that the women who came after didn't replace the ones before. They completed them. Every closed mouth, every suppressed smile, every careful glance, all of it was practice, preparation for the day when the portrait could finally move. The corridor widens now, the walls fade into glass. Beyond them stretches a soft, dusk sky, the colour of old silk. The air feels endless, like a pause at the end of a story before the last line is written. You step forward, and suddenly you're surrounded by reflections, not of queens, but of ordinary faces, hundreds, maybe thousands, women in headscarves and sunglasses, women in uniforms and jeans, women laughing, frowning, thinking, surviving. Some are smiling, some aren't. All are real. And for the first time you see how the royal stillness wasn't just about monarchy, it was a rehearsal for every kind of womanhood that came after, because every generation has its version of that frame. The meeting where you smile through condescension. The photograph where you measure every angle. The tired grin that says, "Yes, I'm fine," when you're not. We learned it from them. The queens, the duchesses, the women who couldn't afford to crack. But we also learned, slowly, that cracks let the light in. Historians will keep debating whether the smile of a royal woman was a symbol of liberation or submission. But standing here, surrounded by faces that no longer need to choose, you realize something simple and profound. It was both, because liberation rarely arrives as a shout. More often it's a whisper, disguised as etiquette, a tiny rebellion hidden inside a perfect pose. The first queen, who pressed her lips shut, didn't know she was starting a conversation that would last 5 centuries. The first one who smiled knew exactly how dangerous that conversation could be. And now here you are, walking among their echoes, listening to the silence that hums like applause. You catch your own reflection again, surrounded by theirs, but finally distinct. You smile, not for history, not for anyone watching, but as a quiet act of acknowledgement, a gesture to say, "I see you, I understand." And from the walls, the still eyes, the soft mouths, the faded colours, you feel the answer come back like a sigh. "We see you too." The corridor begins to dissolve into soft light. The faces fade one by one, not as vanishing but as merging, their shapes becoming something whole, something new. The collective history of composure melting into motion. It's beautiful, it's peaceful. It's the end of pretending that grace and humanity are opposites. You exhale, and your breath fogs the glass briefly. Your reflection blurs, then clears. And there it is again, that faint, familiar curl at the corner of your lips. Not a smile for an audience, not a performance, just presence. For a moment you realize this is the real inheritance left by 500 years of royal women. Not crowns, not portraits, just the right to exist in your own face. No explanation, no apology. You whisper softly, almost like a prayer. We learned to smile when the world was watching. Now we've learned to smile when it's not. And the light, warm and endless, folds around you like velvet. The light shifts again. Not brighter, not darker, just quieter. As if the air itself has exhaled after holding its breath for centuries. You're standing somewhere that feels outside of time, where history has dissolved into something softer, almost dreamlike. There's no gallery now, no marble floor or frame-lined walls, just an endless, weightless space filled with faint ripples of light. You look down. There's nothing to stand on, and yet you're steady. Around you, suspended like lanterns in mist, float the faces of every royal woman you've met along the way. They're not portraits anymore. They're memories. Luminous outlines drawn in light and air. Their faces flicker, not as ghosts, but as after-images. Elizabeth of Thorns, pale and fierce, her gaze sharp enough to outlive an empire. Anne Boleyn, her half-smile now steady, unashamed. Marie Antoinette, soft and laughing, her powdered calm replaced by colour. Victoria, free from posture, eyes kind for once. Mary of Teck finally breathing without correction. Diana, radiant, her grin the first true rebellion the modern age ever loved. Elizabeth II, serene, her final smile folded into eternity. They look at you not as monarchs, not as martyrs, but as women, quiet, knowing, and utterly still in their freedom. For centuries they were trained to endure the gaze of millions. Tonight they meet yours not as a test, but as a welcome. You realize something. They are no longer waiting to be understood. You are the one they were waiting for, the one who could see them whole. The silence around you is warm now, humming like a lullaby made of breath. You think back to all those rules that shaped them, the conduct books, the sermons, the etiquette manuals that declared what a queen's face should or should not reveal. No laughter, no teeth, no wrinkles, no doubt. No humanity without cost. And yet somehow, through it all, they found ways to speak. A glimmer in the eye of a portrait, a tiny quirk in a painted mouth, a letter slipped between drawers, a diary entry scrawled in candlelight, a photograph where a laugh escaped before it could be hidden. Their defiance wasn't loud. It was patient. You begin to drift among their faces, slow and reverent, like walking through a constellation. Each one feels alive, not trapped, not immortalized, but remembered correctly for the first time. Historians still argue about what power means for women like them, whether they shaped history or simply survived it. But here, floating in the glow of their quiet rebellion, you understand that those two things are the same. To survive is to shape. To be still when the world demands movement. To smile when the world demands silence. To breathe when the world demands nothing at all. That's power. You pause before Elizabeth III's face again. Her old words rise from memory, the ones she once wrote to her people. Though I may not have the heart and stomach of a king, I have the heart of a woman, and of England too. Tonight, those words sound different, less about courage, more about endurance. You whisper back, they heard you finally. Her expression softens. The corners of her mouth tilt upward, just slightly. A gesture so small that it could be centuries in the making. You move on. The light grows softer, and with it, something inside you unwinds. Because you realize all this time you've been tracing not just the history of royal women, but the evolution of being seen. From subjects of portraiture to owners of presence, from muses to mirrors, from silent symbols to living voices. Every brushstroke, every photograph, every pixel, all of it was leading here to this understanding. The stillness wasn't weakness, it was waiting for a world ready to see women not as icons or ideals, but as beings, unfiltered, imperfect, radiant in their contradictions. The space hums faintly again, like a heartbeat shared across centuries. The faces begin to merge, fading but becoming something collective. You can't tell where one ends and another begins. It's not a gallery anymore. It's a gathering. Their expressions shift in rhythm. Some serene, some smiling, some almost laughing. And for the first time in this long, winding story, they all look content. Not performing, not surviving, just being. You close your eyes. When you open them again, the faces are gone, replaced by one final reflection. Your own. You see the faintest smile there, the kind that carries all the weight of their history, but none of their fear. And you understand, you're not watching their story anymore. You're continuing it. Because every time a woman anywhere smiles without asking, stands still without apology, or meets the gaze that once tried to define her, she's finishing the work those royal women began centuries ago. It was never about crowns, it was never about beauty. It was about reclaiming the gaze and the grace within it. You take one last breath, the air cool and shimmering around you, and whisper into the glow, "You were never still." You were becoming. The light answers softly as if smiling back. And now so are you. Then silence. Deep, peaceful, eternal. Not the silence of repression, but the kind that follows truth. The silence holds. It doesn't feel empty. It feels full, like the pause between heartbeats. The light that had been shimmering with all those faces settles now into a faint glow, almost candle-like. You stand still for a long time, waiting for something to return, but nothing does. The portraits, the glass, the museum, the palace, all of it has folded away. What's left is only the echo of breath. You realize that somehow you've arrived at the end of the corridor and the beginning of something else. The air is softer here, as if history itself is winding down, exhaling after its long performance. In the distance, you hear the sound of paper turning, gentle, rhythmic, steady. It might be the pages of a book. It might be time itself. You follow the sound. And there it is, a single open journal resting on a table. The ink is still wet, the handwriting delicate, but strong. Across the top of the page, one final line reads, "Every face deserves rest." You sit down beside it, your reflection wavering faintly in the polished surface of the wood. It's strange how quiet this feels, like the moment after a curtain falls when the story is finished, but the meaning still lingers in the air. You think about how far you've travelled, not through geography, but through expression. From the rigid formality of Tudor oil to the unguarded flicker of digital video, from divine silence to human laughter. Every age thought it was teaching women how to behave, but what it was really doing was teaching the world how to look. And now, finally, that gaze has softened. You remember the faces one more time. Elizabeth's defiance, Mary's exhaustion, Victoria's endurance, Diana's light, Elizabeth II's composure. You can still see their smiles lingering in the air like after-images of stars. They're not watching anymore, they're resting, because the gaze, that unending audience of history, has finally shifted away, just enough for peace to enter. You exhale, slow and deep. The air feels heavier now, like warm water wrapping around you. This, you realize, is what they never had. The luxury of stillness without judgment, a smile that belongs to no one but yourself. For centuries, every royal portrait, every photograph, every televised grin was a conversation with power. Every closed mouth was a defense, every faint smile a negotiation. But tonight, the conversation is over. The last image has already been painted, the last photograph already printed, the last news headline already scrolled past. What's left is the echo, gentle, invisible, forgiving. And in that quiet, the question rises, what happens to a face when it no longer has to represent anything but itself? The answer, you suspect, is peace. You lift your gaze, the space around you ripples faintly, dissolving from light into something more tangible. A small, warmly lit room. A lamp hums, a window stands open. Outside, the night wind brushes through the curtains, cool and kind. You hear a voice, your own, soft, almost amused. "Hey guys, tonight we walked through 500 years of faces." The voice trails off, and you smile because you recognize it, your own opening line, looping back like a lullaby. But this time, it's not a beginning, it's a farewell. You step toward the window. The city hums below, distant and alive. The moon hangs heavy, patient as always. You realize you don't need to narrate anymore. The story has told itself. You look out over the rooftops, feeling that gentle ache of closure that comes at the end of a long journey, the kind that's not sadness but gratitude. Because all those silent women, those still faces, those unreadable gazes, they were never lifeless. They were waiting for you to notice what they couldn't say. You whisper it aloud now to the night. To them, to yourself. I see you. I understand. The air seems to warm around you. Somewhere a clock strikes softly, not counting down, but keeping rhythm. The sound fades into the faint rustle of wind through leaves. You close your eyes. The story settles into stillness, not the stillness of suppression, but of rest, the kind that allows breath to deepen, shoulders to loosen, eyes to close. And in that final stillness you realize what this long, wandering journey has been preparing you for. Not revelation, not grandeur, but sleep. The quiet understanding that all stories end not in silence, but in peace. You take one last breath, slow and deliberate. The window hums faintly in the breeze. The moonlight touches your face. Somewhere far behind you, the long gallery of portraits fades to black. Somewhere far ahead, the next dream is already beginning to open. And between those two eternities, there's just you, breathing, calm, free. No pose to hold, no gaze to answer, no smile to perfect, only peace. So now let's let everything go. The crowns, the cameras, the careful composure. Just you here, in the quiet. The history has folded itself neatly away. You don't need to remember it anymore. Let your body sink deeper into where you are. Your chair, your bed, your own soft stillness. Feel how heavy the day has become, how ready it is to rest. Each breath out is another brushstroke fading. Each breath in is a clean canvas, blank and calm. The queens, the portraits, the endless eyes of the world. They've all dimmed into the background now, and what's left is the oldest kind of silence, and the kind that doesn't ask anything of you. If your thoughts wander, let them. They're only echoes of stories that have already ended. If you smile, let it be small and real, the kind that asks for nothing, not even understanding. You can almost hear the faint sound of pages closing somewhere far away. That's the sound of time folding itself up for the night. And as you drift, the faces that once held the world's weight smile again, not out of duty, but release. They wish you rest. So let your eyelids grow heavy. Let your breathing slow. Let the world soften around the edges. You've walked through centuries tonight.